In 2008, NASA had an intriguing question. How do spiders construct their webs in zero gravity? Therefore, they sent 2 spiders to the International Space Station. The first spider was the main participant, while the second served as a backup in case the first one didn't survive. However, things didn't go according to plan. The backup spider managed to escape from its chamber and visited its companion, resulting in a bit of a mess. They built tangled webs that interfered with each other. As if that wasn't enough, the flies that were supposed to be food for the spiders started reproducing faster than anticipated. Their larvae escaped from their container and covered the front window of the chamber. Over time, the spiders were completely hidden behind the larvae. Although this initial experiment didn't go well, one of the researchers involved in planning the spider experiment was still curious. In 2011, she got another opportunity to repeat the same experiment. This time, she sought assistance from other researchers. They decided to send a different species of spider into space and prepared 4 spiders, 2 for the ISS and 2 for Earth, allowing for result comparison. The goal was to expose the spiders to varying gravity conditions and observe their behavior. However, another twist appeared in the story. Initially, they believed they had 4 female spiders, but it turned out that 2 of them were actually males. Determining the sex of young spiders can be tricky, but fortunately, one male had already been sent to space, while the other remained on Earth, enabling valuable data collection. The second experiment proved successful. The spiders were active. They built and dismantled webs, and even without the assistance of gravity, they spun new ones. 3 cameras captured thousands of pictures, showcasing their hard work on the webs. Interestingly, it seemed that spiders created significantly more symmetrical webs in space than on Earth. The center of the webs was closer to the middle, and surprisingly, the spiders didn't always position their heads downward as they typically do on Earth. However, one significant factor made all the difference: light. When the spiders on the ISS had a source of light, they weaved asymmetrical webs, similar to those found on our home planet. Light played a crucial role in orienting the spiders in space. The chamber's lamps were attached at the top. If the lights had been positioned differently, for example on the side, it would have been challenging to observe the effect of light on the symmetry of webs in zero gravity. When the lights were turned off, the spiders rested in random orientations within their webs. Yet with the lights on, they would orient themselves away from the light source, which meant downward. Hence, in the absence of gravity, light assisted them in orientation. This discovery was unexpected, because spiders can typically build their webs in the dark and capture prey effectively, even without light. Spider's web itself is such a cool thing wherever they are. It's like these creatures have small silk production factories inside them. Within their body, a thread is stored in the form of a highly concentrated liquid. And a regular garden spider can produce up to 7 different types of silk, each having a unique combination of proteins. Each type of silk has a different purpose. For example, one type of thread makes the web elastic, which means the web absorbs the impact when insects collide with it. Another type of silk makes the thread flexible and strong, so it's more difficult to break. Some proteins found in the silk protect it from harmful bacteria and fungi, allowing the web to last longer. They also keep the silk moist so it doesn't dry out. Wow, imagine having a home where you don't have to buy anything extra to maintain it. Spider silk is lighter than cotton and incredibly thin, up to 1,000 times thinner than human hair. But it's also insanely strong. I mean, it must be, since that's what they rely on while living their everyday life. Whether they're preying on some wandering insect or trying to resist heavy rain and wind. But you wouldn't expect it to be stronger than steel, right? Of course, in reality, you don't come across steel that thin. But if you could find a piece with the same weight as spider silk, you'd see that it has similar strength when pulled or stretched. In fact, spider silk is 5 times stronger than steel of the same thickness. Spider silk is also super stretchy, able to stretch up to 4 times its original length without breaking. Plus, it remains strong even in freezing temperatures below -40 degrees F. The most common type of spider is the orb weaver. They're masters at building those webs you keep seeing in open areas. That's where they have a better chance to catch a tasty lunch. But since they choose such spots, their webs are more prone to damage. That's why these spiders have a fascinating habit. They often rebuild their entire webs every day, even if the current web seems perfectly fine. I wish I was this dedicated to maintaining my bedroom. These spiders actually do this because they want to be prepared for the evening when they patiently wait for their potential prey to get caught in their carefully set trap. At first, this might seem like a waste of time. After all, they need to invest a significant amount of protein to produce the silk that forms their webs. But even if an orb weaver spider doesn't catch its meal overnight, it usually has enough silk proteins to dismantle its old web and build a new one for the following night. As the spider removes the old web, it consumes the silk at the same time, and by doing that, recycles the proteins it contains. If you've ever observed a spider on its web, you must have noticed how attentively it responds to even the slightest vibrations. It turns out that spider silk can be finely adjusted to different sound frequencies, unlike any other material. When a spider builds its web, it doesn't just spin the silk and leave it as it is. The spider actually makes adjustments to the silk by changing how tight or loose it is, and how different threads are connected. This way, it creates a web that can vibrate or make different kinds of sounds. The spider is like a musician tuning their guitar. This feather-legged lace weaver is called the garden center spider because it mostly enjoys humid greenhouse conditions, and it has a really cool way of catching insects. Instead of spinning sticky webs like other spiders, it uses electricity. It produces incredibly thin silk, almost at the nanoscale. And on its hind legs, this spider has special hairs that act like tiny combs. As the silk emerges from its body, the spider uses these hairs to comb and manipulate the silk. And here's where the magic happens. This process generates an electric charge. The threads of the silk are now crackling with electricity, so they come together to form little poofs that resemble fluffy balls of wool. These electrically charged poofs are a great way to trap innocent insects wandering around. When unsuspecting prey comes into contact with them, the electric charge causes the threads to cling to their bodies, making it almost impossible to get away. Female Darwin's bark spiders make gigantic webs that can stretch over rivers and lakes, which means they can reach over 80 feet across. It turns out such enormous webs are just a part of their genius plan to catch their prey. A super strong web that goes across the water like a bridge can capture large insects that gracefully fly above the water's surface, like dragonflies, and it's an impressive project that takes days to construct. These special lines go across the river and anchor the web firmly to each bank. There's no easy way out of this.
Hey, we landed on the moon. We sailed around the world. Romeo met Juliet. Hey, it's hard to imagine that there are creatures out there who saw it all happen. Immortal animals. Well, almost. Glass sponges are weird little creatures that sit in one place for thousands of years. From their favorite spot under the sea, they witnessed the first Europeans crossing over to the Americas. They can live up to 15,000 years. And what's even cooler is that they can control their aging process, speed it up or slow it down. They have a glass-like exoskeleton for protection. Lobsters can grow back a limb if they lose it, and they're basically immortal. They produce an unlimited number of enzymes that keeps their DNA young forever, and they just keep on growing. That means they outgrow their own shells. They have to shed their exoskeleton every now and then and upgrade to a bigger one. The largest lobster ever caught was 44 pounds off the coast of Nova Scotia. Scientists think this large lobster was around 100 years old. It was around when Edison invented the phonograph. This next creature is a mix between a jellyfish and a tree branch. Each end of the hydra has a ringed foot, and it spends its days chilling by lakes and rivers. Its tentacles grab onto tasty snacks that swim past it. So, what's the secret to its immortality? That's something everyone wants to know. The hydra has the ability to renew its stem cells. Scientists have been trying to do that for years. They can actually slow down their aging process. Now, these little sea creatures are red sea urchins. They sit on seaweed in shallow waters and are immortal. Well, we haven't been studying them long enough to know for sure, but scientists say they only grow in size, not in age. What? Well, they sort of stay like little baby urchins, but grow in size. Adult, baby urchin, okay. These little babies can reach around 100 years old, even 200. The slowest on the list? The giant tortoise. It can reach 200 years old, and one of the oldest is Jonathan. He's technically the oldest crawling land animal. He was born in 1832 and lives it up on a remote island called St. Helena. Jonathan's been through a lot. He's seen the very first American skyscraper, the Eiffel Tower. Oh yeah, he's also lived through every single World Series, starting when he was 71 years old. Now he can't see too well and he's lost his sense of smell, but he's still going strong. Back to the oceans and the Greenland shark. It's been known to be the longest living vertebrate and can live more than 400 years. Swimming around for that long in the deep, dark, cold ocean means these sharks are tough. They're able to withstand insane water pressure. Sharks are one of the only creatures today that haven't been affected too much by evolution. Many sharks have been around since the dinosaurs and haven't changed much. Scientists found out that they grow around ½ an inch per year. So, with a little bit of quick math, they can easily find out the age of these tough sharks. Imagine seeing a shark that's older than the USA. This next creature is probably the most durable, indestructible, and cutest on the list. It's called a tardigrade, but scientists nickname it water bear because I guess it looks like one. But it's not exactly bear size. It has 8 legs and hands with a strange little nose. And these bizarre microscopic creatures are indestructible. They're known to live in the most extreme places on the planet. They're fine with temperatures as high as 300 and as low as minus 330. Volcanoes, frozen desert nights, they can even handle radiation and massive amounts of pressure in the deepest parts of the ocean. They can even survive the vacuum in space. No tiny little spacesuit or anything. That would be cute enough. So far, they've survived 10 days on the outside of a spaceship, but they could probably do longer. Tardigrades might be able to outlive humans if there's some sort of worldwide catastrophe. Microscopic organisms in charge of the planet. Wonder what that would look like. Whether it's all the volcanoes erupting at once, or another ice age, or even another pesky asteroid. Tardigrades probably wouldn't even notice. Scientists are studying them to see if they can help us with some next-level biotech. Now, just for fun, here's the mayfly. This poor little insect doesn't even make it past 24 hours on average. Females and males can make it to a whopping 2 days old. Talk about living in the moment. These little flies grow in swarms and are known to have one of the shortest lifespans of any creature. But as a species, well, they've been around for hundreds of millions of years. Jellyfish have discovered the fountain of youth, and surprise, surprise, it's been inside them all along. Not inspirational poster style, but literally, it's always been inside them. Jellyfish are able to reverse their aging process whenever they want. Imagine you're swimming along and then you think to yourself, gee, I kind of want to be 8 again. And poof, there you are. Who wouldn't want to go back to being 8? That's how jellyfish stay young and live stress-free. These brainless and boneless creatures can turn the clock back anytime they want, as long as no one bothers them. They're super chill, just floating in whatever direction the current takes them. Like, go with the flow? This creature looks like something right out of a sci-fi movie, and you could say it has sort of alien features. The giant weta outweighs a mouse and is considered one of the biggest insects out there. You find these big bugs in New Zealand. While jellyfish can reverse their aging process, some members of the weta family can come back to life. Talk about superpowers. If they get completely frozen, they start to make special proteins that stop their organs from getting ruined. After whatever amount of time they're frozen, they can be thawed out and brought back to life, like nothing ever happened. In fact, the giant weta has ears on its knees in its front legs. And because it can resurrect, it's also called the zombie bug. Planaria are flatworms that are unique. Apart from being practically immortal, they're the ultimate regeneration machines for lost body parts. If you take one of them and divide its body into 10 parts, you'll end up with 10 new planaria. You keep dividing them up, they'll keep multiplying, even though they're usually less than an inch long. Imagine if we could figure out how to do that. Would that be a way for us to live forever? Or would we end up with a totally crazy world with copies of everyone walking around? How about the world's fastest relay team, 4 identical Usain Bolts? Now, clams have been around for a really long time. Scientists have discovered that they can live up to 400 years old. These little shelled creatures are the ones that create those shiny little pearls everyone loves. A clam will go into action mode when a parasite gets inside. The clam tries to cover the parasite with a bunch of special chemicals, the same ones it uses to make the inside of its shell. That's when the magic starts to happen. When these chemicals harden up, they make a shiny, glossy pearl. The more chemicals, the bigger the pearl. Now, this long, slippery-looking creature lives deep in the caves of Europe. Olm can live up to be 100 years old. It spends its days hunting for little insects, snails, and crabs with its tiny front arms and wriggling snake-like body. Its skin is so pale that some locals even call it the human fish. Hey, wait a minute. The olm is almost blind, but it can still detect light. It just mostly does it through its skin. Like other blind animals, it has a supercharged sense of hearing and smell. It gets its distinct look from those little red gills around its neck.
We interrupt this program to bring you this important message. The Earth is no longer fit for living, so you'll need to find your own new home. You immediately get the brilliant idea to apply for a job as an astronaut. You'll be able to wait over the hustle and bustle on the International Space Station until humanity finds a new home, right? The longest time a human has spent in space so far is 437 days and a few extra hours. And when I say in space, I mean the ISS, because a human being without the proper equipment in open space would only last a few seconds. The ISS is designed to support human life in space for extended periods of time. Extended, but not endless. The station gets resupplied with food, water, air, fuel, scientific equipment, and other necessities every 3 months. With no Earth or humans to send the mission, this lifeline will soon be broken. The station is a huge ship moving through space at over 17,000 miles per hour. It faces pretty harsh conditions, from radiation to micrometeoroids and huge temperature ups and downs. That's why the system regularly needs patching up. In addition to wear and tear, there are also unexpected events that can require resupply missions. In 2020, the crew discovered a leak that was causing a gradual loss of air pressure. They eventually found cracks in one of the modules. The crew managed to fix it, but it proves how important it is to have enough spare parts on board. Let's say the future humans will manage to find a way to run the station non-stop without restocking. Astronauts already grow plants in space in closed boxes with low-energy LED lights. It's not only a source of vitamins, without which humans can't survive, but a great mood booster. We'd also need more advanced closed-loop life support systems to recycle air and water efficiently. It's a system that captures carbon dioxide from the air by passing it through small beads. Then it uses steam to separate the carbon dioxide and transform it into methane and water. Water then divides back into oxygen. But even with all the possible advances, there's another problem: the health of the astronauts. They live and work in a microgravity environment, and they rely on carefully controlled life support systems. But our bodies aren't designed to live in weightlessness forever. It's like standing on your head, because the reduced gravity makes bodily fluids accumulate in the upper parts of your body. The result is a puffy red face. The gravitational force on the ISS is weaker than on Earth, so muscles don't have to work as hard and bones gradually lose their density. That's why each crew member follows a strict daily exercise routine. The heart muscle also weakens because it doesn't have to use as much effort to circulate blood throughout the body. Without Earth's protective atmosphere, astronauts are continuously exposed to cosmic rays. They are invisible waves that can cause some serious health issues. So maybe we're better off opting for Mars or the Moon for an alternative home.
You're sitting at a coffee shop on Mars, keeping your head down, trying not to draw any attention to yourself. It's crowded, and many people are singing, dancing, and talking loudly about life on Mars. Your drink arrives, and you sip on it. So far, no one recognizes you. You're wearing a cloak with a large hoodie to cover your face and disguise yourself from everyone. Someone accidentally bumps into you and sees your face. The music stops, and now everyone is staring at you. You have nowhere to hide or run. You ignore the leering eyes and keep sipping on your beverage. An old bearded man sits in front of you, amazed to be in your presence.
"So, it's true. No one believed you'd make it,"
he says. You don't reply and continue with your drink. Everyone else gathers around you. Another man speaks.
"Well, are you not going to tell us how you escaped from the clutches of the space kraken?"
Everyone gasps in shock. No one has ever made it to tell the tale of the kraken, except you. Your plan was to find your messenger to take you to a spaceship far away from this planet. But it's too late, now that everyone knows you're here. And the messenger fled, knowing all the attention was on you. You lay back your hoodie and explain what happened. 2 days ago. You're in your full gear, ready to make the voyage into deep space. You have a solo ship that's designed to maneuver through all the obstacles in space. You prepare the rest of the gear and fuel up. Everyone is watching you, knowing that you might not make it back. But the Kraken has been floating in space for too long, disrupting shipping containers bringing in goods. A small ship like yours can sneak past its acute sense of smell and vision. But larger ships will get destroyed. You made it your mission to find this Kraken and study it. If you learn its ways and patterns, you can figure out how to get rid of it. Everyone says their goodbyes, and you lift off. You know that it'll be a very long way to get there, possibly 3 days in the emptiness of space. You saw some quick footage of it, but no one knows exactly where it sleeps, or if it even does sleep. You put on some tunes and set your ship for cruise control. You make some notes and set the camera to document yourself while you prepare everything you need. You also have some cameras outside recording everything that moves, even thermal sensors to catch living creatures floating in space. After a few hours, you exit the safe quarters of Mars and enter into the hostile territory. There is no place to hide or anyone to help you. A few little ships like yours pass by now and then. They watch you going further to the Kraken. You notice many floating signs powered by machines warning you about the Kraken. The cameras start recording, and you begin your video journal, which is transmitting to your network at home. So far, nothing. It's quiet and dark. Hours pass, and you're just floating in the middle of nowhere. You almost feel like you want to turn around, but then you pick up something in the sensors. You see a large live object nearby. You turn off the lights and slow down your ship. You resume recording and start talking to yourself, explaining everything. The object is getting closer and closer. You move aside to avoid it and latch on to a floating rock, but you still don't see anything. Out of nowhere, you see some glowing jellyfish-like creatures flowing together in a cluster. On your thermal sensors, they appear to be large objects, but in fact, they are just little creatures. According to your studies, these creatures are some of the main foods for the Kraken, so they're probably running away from it. After a few minutes, the creatures float away, and you launch yourself out and turn the lights back on. A few more hours pass, and you still see no Kraken. Suddenly, a whoosh shakes your ship, and you're thrown slightly off course. You notice that a large object has spiked your thermal sensors and left. You keep going and check the playback settings to see if your cameras manage to catch something. You try to look carefully, but it seems like a gust of wind blew past you, which is weird because there is no wind in space. You check the thermal sensors and notice that a large object shaped like the Kraken has zipped past you. It's still around, and it has probably caught your scent. Your system's got some DNA particles and are studying them. After a while, they show that the Kraken's skin can change colors according to its surrounding. Its skin is thick and made up of some cosmic fluorescent material that is new to any creature you've ever come across. The system continues studying it. After a while, the Kraken goes off your radar and disappears. You circle back, trying to find it. People back on Mars can see the data and already have information about its size and skin quality. They even see some footage you've managed to catch. As you continue driving towards it, you open your floodlights, trying to see anything. Your cameras are still rolling. Suddenly, the Kraken changes skin color and appears right in front of you. Its large tentacles flash around, whipping nearby space debris. Its large eye, that's as big as a bus, looks right at you. It opens its mouth, and you see layers of sharp teeth circling like a grinder. It has a large beak that can break your ship easily. It starts flashing its colors rapidly as a way to warn you. It shoots out some liquid to move in a no-gravity space environment. It's moving towards you until it launches itself. Your ship has an auto force field for protection, but it can't sustain the powerful bite of the Kraken. After only a few seconds, the shield breaks and your ship spirals down to another planet. You crash-landed in a swampy land. Your ship has survived, but it can't take off. The analysis of the Kraken is ready. It shows that it doesn't need oxygen to breathe, and its DNA is evolving. Now that it got a bite of your force field, it can adapt itself to create a bioforce field of a similar nature. But you crashed on a planet that is foreign to you. You put on your safety suit and observe the environment. The atmosphere is filled with nitrogen and sulfur. You get out and walk around. It has similar gravity to that of Earth. As you venture through the swamp, you start seeing little skin particles similar to those your ship has caught. The liquid below you is some foreign substance that seems to be deteriorating your suit, so you opt to hover. The trees are strange and seem to be living off the atmosphere, but there is no sign of life anywhere. Suddenly, you see a huge crater that leads to the center of the planet. You enter it and see some ships similar to yours. It seems that the Kraken knocked them off course, and they all crash-landed on this planet. Many of them seem to be intact, while others are completely obliterated. Your sensors pick up another reading. It senses another creature dwelling in the center. You try to get closer. You're doing your best to be as gentle as possible, but you feel the ground shaking below you. You duck down and try to avoid the rocks falling overhead. A large tentacle pops out of nowhere, and then another and another. It swings itself out and crawls in the open. According to your system's studies, this Kraken is 10 times larger and even looks different. It doesn't spot you, but it can sense that you're around. It starts thrashing the planet, trying to find you. It knocks your ship. You try to find a way to start it, but it's missing a piece. You find another abandoned ship and take out the part that you need and put it on your ship. Your suit has an auto repair function that allows you to fix your ship without the tools. After a few minutes, it's ready for takeoff. You power up your ship, even though it's damaged, and lift off. You manage to sneak past the Kraken. Everyone at the coffee shop is silent. Many don't believe your stories. They had stopped receiving live transmissions before you were knocked off by the space Kraken. Out of nowhere, an alarm rings and warns that the Kraken has arrived. Everyone rushes off in a panic. You hear a voice in your head. It's a bunch of gibberish, but you start getting visions of the Kraken talking to you. It knows you're here, and it's coming for you.
Recently, Chinese scientists discovered something interesting on the moon, an unusual crystal. Moreover, they found out that this crystal contains an element that can literally replace nuclear fuel. Let's find out more. The composition of the moon has long remained a mystery to us. Half a century has already passed since the Apollo mission. Unfortunately, we haven't traveled to the moon much since then. So it's not surprising that it's not so easy for us to study it. But recently, we've made a breakthrough in this area. In December 2020, Chinese scientists sent the Chang'e 5 probe to the moon. The mission was named after the ancient Chinese deity of the moon, Chang'e. Quite poetic, isn't it? Anyway, After the probe went to the nearest side of the moon, it spent several days digging through the surface and rocks and then returned to Earth. In total, it collected about 4 pounds of various lunar rocks, like basalt, solidified lava, and so on. And yeah, maybe it doesn't sound too impressive, but it's actually a mini breakthrough. After all, we hadn't received any lunar samples since 1976. And these samples are very important for learning the history of our world. We've been struggling for many years to find out, for example, how the moon was born at all. Yes, there were a lot of theories, but we still couldn't find any proper evidence for any of them. But thanks to the latest missions and some computer simulations, scientists finally found out the truth. The moon was born when some random dwarf planet crashed into our Earth many millions of years ago. This dwarf planet was slightly smaller than Mars. The fragments of the Earth went into space, but some of them stayed in our orbit. Then they stuck together and formed the moon. It sounds horrifying, but in reality, the birth of the moon was the best thing to ever happen to our planet. If it weren't for this beautiful satellite, all our oceans would be small puddles. Life wouldn't have appeared on Earth at all. So this is already an amazing discovery, but that's still not all. Studying the collected rocks, scientists from the Beijing Research Institute discovered something unusual, a rare lunar crystal. Looks pretty boring, doesn't it? Just some tiny transparent monocrystal about the thickness of a human hair. We've already found such things on the moon before. These crystals were formed as a result of volcanic activity, just like some garnets on the Earth. And yep, the place where they discovered these crystals also suffered from volcanoes 1.2 billion years ago. That means that this tiny baby is over 1 billion years old. But that's not the most important thing. It's the fact that this crystal is made of a unique material, the one that we've never seen before. Researchers from the International Mineralogical Association have confirmed that such a composition can't be found anywhere on Earth. The crystal was named chongasite, again after the same moon deity. And this is another achievement. This is the 6th previously unknown mineral that we've found on the moon and the first one found by China. Now, it has become the 3rd country in the world to make such a lunar discovery. However, this tiny crystal still wasn't the only remarkable thing they found. After studying this gem and about 140,000 other lunar particles, scientists have discovered something else. They found helium-3. Why is it so important? Because this is one of the elements that feed the sun and other stars in our universe. We tend to say stuff like, put out the sun is burning, and so on. And this is one of the reasons why many people actually think that the sun is a huge fireball. But it's not. Its burning is actually a completely different process, which is called nuclear fusion. The process itself is quite simple. During this reaction, hydrogen in the star turns into helium. But this simple process is actually one of the most violent and insane reactions in the universe. There's a real boiling broth of particles inside the sun. The hydrogen nuclei that jump and rush there are constantly repelling each other since all of them are positively charged. And so they could continue to boil and chill around without bothering anyone if it weren't for the stars. The stars turned out to be cheaters. They have such strong gravity that they basically grab billions of these little atoms and squeeze them together. Combining with each other, these atoms create new, heavy elements, like the mentioned helium. And when this happens, they throw a lot of energy into space. And that's how the sun burns. At the same time, it spreads so much energy that we can't even imagine. Okay, so what is helium-3? Well, this is an element to which even the sun can say, "Whoa dude, you should calm down." The fusion of helium-3 atoms releases even more energy than in typical nuclear fusion. And most importantly, it doesn't pollute the atmosphere with harmful things like radiation. We have very, very little helium-3 on Earth. Its prevalence in our atmosphere is about 1 in a million. And besides, it's constantly trying to escape from us back into space. Probably feels some bad vibes from us. However, scientists have recently found out that there's a place that contains a lot of this element. Yep, you guessed it, it's the moon. We think that there's more helium-3 on the moon than on Earth because of the solar winds. The sun has been hammering on the moon with its helium-3 for billions of years, so now it's all over the place. It's still not too much if you compare it, for example, with Jupiter or Saturn. But don't forget how much energy it can release. For your information, with only 25 tons of helium-3, it's possible to provide America with energy for an entire year. Now, there are 35,000 tons of it here on Earth, and more than 1 million tons on the moon. Only these sources could feed the entire US for thousands of years. So basically, in the future, helium-3 may become a new source of fuel. And it's better than nuclear fuel in basically everything. Helium-3 won't leave any harmful waste and radiation. It's more powerful and not that dangerous. In other words, this environmentally friendly and efficient energy could be a revolution for our planet. Sounds cool, huh? So, what are we waiting for? Grab the shovels, you might say. But there's a little problem here. Unfortunately, we haven't yet come up with anything as wildly strong and hot as the stars. To use helium-3, we need crazy temperatures and pressure. We need a thermonuclear reactor, and we have no idea how to build it, yet. And even if we could heat it up to such temperatures and get the needed pressure, we still don't really know how to handle helium-3 correctly. Therefore, even if we have an infinite amount of helium-3, we still won't be able to use it. But still, there's a great power behind helium-3, so it's not surprising that different countries have already started a race for nuclear resources. Now that Chang'e 5 has discovered a new helium-3 deposit on the nearest side of the moon, this race can become downright global. For example, China already plans a new lunar mission in 2024, Chang'e 6. During this mission, they want to collect the first samples from the far side of the moon. As you can see, finding this lunar crystal was very important for us. These crystals can help us find new ways to create helium-3. And if we manage to do that, humankind will enter a new era. But to do this, we still have to solve a number of problems. How to deliver a bunch of these lunar crystals to Earth, how to make them produce energy, and so on. Let's hope that in the future these issues will be resolved and we'll find a way to produce clean, safe, unlimited energy.
The first trip intending to land on the moon made by human mammals took 3 days, 3 hours, and 49 minutes. The Apollo 11 astronauts needed to travel some 240,000 miles to get there. Their plan was to touch down on a place on the moon called the Sea of Tranquility, because it had good visibility and the terrain there was pretty smooth. Well, up until the last few moments of the flight, when all these big craters appeared that they had to avoid, they finally landed with just 30 seconds of fuel left. Ooh, that's called cutting it close. Hey, how would you like to land in your jetliner with only 30 seconds of fuel left? So, now you know. Later that day, July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar soil, saying, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." The astronauts were planning to sleep before the first moonwalk, but they chose to go outside earlier than scheduled. They obviously couldn't sleep. I mean, could you? Since that first visit, our lunar satellite has accumulated quite a collection of memorabilia from Earth. Let's look at some of the most important and weird stuff that humans have left on the moon. Take footprints, for starters. I know they're not technically objects, but the marks left by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin do show that humans have been there, just in case someone or something else drops by. Since the moon doesn't have any wind or rain, the footprints should still be relatively untouched. NASA put in a lot of effort to make sure these footprints stay protected, as well as the location of the initial moon landing. Rules were set into place for future missions to make sure they wouldn't alter the initial site, as it's an important piece of history, kind of like a national park that you can't get to. Now, astronaut Charles Duke wanted to leave a photo of his family on the surface of the moon. If that didn't make him the best dad ever, I don't know what would. He did take his family to the moon, right? On the back of the picture, he wrote that he had come from Earth. He also added the date when he landed on the moon, which was April 20th, 1972. Now, there's a good chance that his family is no longer visible in the picture today. Because of the exposure to strong solar radiation, the colors in the photo have likely faded away by now. To this day, Charles Duke remains the youngest person to visit our moon. He was 36 years old at the time of his mission. Now, there are many flags on the surface of the moon too, but the flags left there must have had a similar fate to Duke's photo. They're most likely discolored by now. During each lunar landing, a flag was planted as a tradition started by Apollo 11. This tradition continued with all future Apollo missions. The flags were made using metal poles to stretch the flag out so they could be seen on the moon. But since there's no wind, they never move. Back in the 1600s, astronomer Galileo Galilei dropped two objects of different weights from the Leaning Tower of Pisa to show that the speed of the fall would be the same. In 1971, astronaut David Scott repeated the experiment on the moon and proved Galileo's theory correct. He dropped a feather and a hammer at the same time, and as predicted, they both landed on the moon's surface simultaneously. Fun fact, the feather came from the Air Force Academy's Falcon mascot named Baffin, with its permission, of course. These objects were both left on the lunar surface. Now, what about art pieces on the moon? We've left some of those out there as well. The Fallen Astronaut sculpture was made by a Belgian artist and left behind by the astronauts of the Apollo 15 mission. It was a small statue requested by David Scott, the head of the mission. Scott said the statue was to memorialize the astronauts and cosmonauts who gave their lives for the advancement of space exploration. Meanwhile, astronaut Alan Shepard even played some golf on the moon during his mission on Apollo 14. He brought a golf club head, yes, he got permission first, and attached it to a tool. Then he tried to hit two golf balls. Hey, it's hard to do in a clunky spacesuit. He did better on the second one. It's safe to say that he didn't bring the golf balls back, and they should still be there on the moon. There's yet a message from Queen Elizabeth II there. The monarch prepared a message which accompanied Neil and Buzz to Tranquility Base during the Apollo 11 mission. It was written on a tiny disc the size of a coin and also featured messages from over 70 other leaders from all over the world. I'll bet the printing was really small. Her message said she was proud of the astronauts and their accomplishments and hoped their journey would benefit all of humanity. The disc was then placed where Armstrong and his team first landed on the moon. After they returned, they met the Queen at Buckingham Palace. Their encounter was memorable too. Neil Armstrong almost couldn't speak to the Queen at all because he had a cold. Another astronaut named Mike Collins was so nervous about the protocol, he almost fell down the stairs. Now, some objects that exist today on the moon weren't left there on purpose. One of the most interesting moments of the Apollo 11 mission was when Neil and Buzz were getting ready to go back to Earth. They had to chuck everything they didn't need so they wouldn't be weighed down at liftoff. They also needed to store all the rock samples they had gathered from the lunar surface. This created a toss zone that archaeologists could potentially study one day. Waste like this acts as a timeline for Earth's history, but it can also help us understand what happens to objects that spend a lot of time on the surface of the moon. Now, most astronauts became pretty sentimental when strolling on the lunar dust, and who could blame them? They were thousands of miles away from their families. So that's why, in 1972, NASA astronaut Eugene Cernan wrote his daughter's initials, TDC, in the dust on the moon, and gave a speech before leaving. He said, "We leave as we came, and hopefully we'll return with peace and hope for all." Unfortunately, this marked the end of the Apollo lunar missions. Technically, his daughter's initials should still be there on the surface of the moon, just like all the astronauts' footprints. Can you believe it's been more than 50 years since people started exploring the moon? No worries though, as NASA's been preparing for future lunar explorations for quite some time. This new mission is called Artemis, and it aims to build some sort of settlement out there. This way, the moon can be studied in safe conditions for longer periods of time. For starters, NASA launched Orion, a spacecraft without a crew on board, to orbit the moon and come back to Earth. This was a test drive. Before NASA transports people to the moon again using newer technology, all safety measures need to be worked out and confirmed. But one day soon, Orion is going to take astronauts back to the Moon. One cool thing about this spacecraft is that it comes with a launch abort system, which is meant to keep astronauts safe in case something goes bad during the launch. It also features a special service module, which is like a battery that fuels and propels Orion through space. It also supplies astronauts with water, oxygen, and power, and provides temperature control. But Artemis also looks to build a long-term human settlement on our satellite somewhere around the 2030s. However, searching for a cozy place on the Moon isn't as easy as you'd think. Thankfully, NASA specialists produced an ingenious idea. They found some lava tubes on the surface of the Moon, and they have pretty steady temperatures inside. The main problem with the first moon landing back in 1969 was extreme temperature fluctuations. So these caves might be the perfect solution. Not only is the temperature in there suitable for humans, but they could also help shield astronauts from cosmic rays, solar radiation, and meteorites. It's also good news that we have similar structures here on Earth. Before we get back to space, we can study them to better understand those found on the Moon. Here on Earth, these holes form once the top of a stream of lava solidifies, and the molten rock inside drains away, creating this tube.
So, the Terra planet's location seems to be at these coordinates. Okay, let's go to outer space to see the situation. Is it me, or is something moving? Oh no, there's too many piranhas! Oh my, there's too many of them. Oh no, 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 no! Leave me alone! Wait, no! I have to get back to the ship! We need to find shelter, now! Just a little bit more. Now we need to push off in the direction of the ship. It seems they don't see me. Come on, come on! Come on, almost! Oh no, this is the end. No, no, go away! Huh? So you guys aren't as bad as people say?
NASA has some incredible plans for the Moon. For example, their next ambitious lunar program, Artemis II. They've set their sights on landing astronauts, including the first woman and the next man, on the Moon by 2024. Artemis is all about building a sustainable presence on the Moon. They're planning to establish a lunar gateway, a sort of space station in lunar orbit, which will serve as a jumping-off point for lunar landings. And let's not forget about the cool lunar landers. Scientists are developing the mighty Space Launch System rocket, which will launch the Orion spacecraft carrying astronauts towards the Moon. Then there's the Human Landing System, a snazzy lunar lander that will gently touch down on the Moon's surface, allowing astronauts to explore and conduct amazing scientific experiments. And NASA isn't going alone this time. They're teaming up with international partners, like the European Space Agency, to make this lunar dream a reality. But all these wonderful dreams might be ruined by something that seems super small and insignificant at first. Picture this: no atmosphere, no air to breathe, and suddenly, a mysterious haze and radiant beams of light appear at sunrise and sunset. It's as if the Moon is putting on a celestial show. But there is a twist to this beauty. During the Apollo 17 mission in 1972, this beautiful sight made one of the NASA astronauts, Harrison Schmitt, sneeze and made his eyes water. He called it lunar hay fever. This mysterious fever affected all 12 moonwalkers. From sneezing fits to stuffy noses, those astronauts experienced symptoms as if they caught a cold. It took days for the reactions to fade away. This event led to a discovery about lunar dust and its darker side. When scientists found out about these rays, they rolled up their sleeves and delved into their origins. And here's what they discovered. Those radiant bands of light were actually caused by sunlight sneaking through layers of teeny tiny lunar dust. The dust was composed of small particles and sharp glass shards and was lurking everywhere. And it turned out that this lunar dust was a sneaky villain. It brought a whole host of problems. Astronauts who found themselves with impaired vision were just the beginning. The troublemaker went even further, damaging precious machinery and causing electronic malfunctions. It even had the audacity to corrode components and smelled like burnt gunpowder inside the spacecraft. Yikes. It clings to everything, coating surfaces like a mischievous blanket. It can clog up equipment, get into delicate machinery, and even mess with astronauts' spacesuits. In 1972, things got really hairy again. The Apollo 17 astronauts faced a nightmare. After just 22 hours of gallivanting on the lunar surface, their spacesuits suffered irreparable damage. Yes, you heard that right. Irreparable. The dust diminished astronauts' mobility, making it harder for them to move around and perform their moonwalks with grace. And no matter how hard they tried to clean it off, it clung on for dear life, leaving the spacesuits in a sorry state. So, as you can see, it poses some serious challenges for future moon missions. But our intrepid scientists aren't giving up. To solve this problem, they have to understand how lunar dust forms and why it's so darn clingy. They found out that it all begins with meteorite impacts. When these space rocks crash into the moon, they generate a fine dust that fills the air. Sometimes these impacts even cause minerals to melt, forming sharp glass shards that mix with the dust. Talk about a moon makeover. The dust is also filled with silicate, a material commonly found on volcanic planets. Silicate inhalation can cause serious lung problems for Earth's miners, so you can imagine the trouble it can cause on the moon. A recent study found that even a scoop of replica moon dust was toxic enough to destroy up to 90% of lung and brain cells exposed to it. But it gets worse. The low gravity on the moon allows those tiny particles to float around for much longer, penetrating deeper into the lungs. Imagine breathing particles 50 times smaller than a human hair for months. That's a recipe for trouble. And you see, on the moon's surface, things are a bit different than here. There are no rainstorms or strong gusts of wind to blow this dust away. There is also no atmosphere to protect the surface. So without the natural forces of wind and water erosion like we have on Earth, these dry particles stick around persistently. And to make matters more electrifying, the moon is constantly showered by radiation from the sun. This exposure gives the dust an electric charge. The solar winds create positively and negatively charged particles. The particles then buzz around, repelling each other and giving rise to those radiant bands of light that the Apollo 8 astronauts witnessed. It's like a disco party on the moon. ESA, the European Space Agency, has gathered a team of experts to study the lunar dust. They're working with simulated moon dust mined from a volcanic region in Germany to understand its behavior and effects. Engineers also need to find a way to protect future astronauts and equipment. Engineers in NASA want to create spacesuits that can survive not 1, not 10, but a whopping 100 extravehicular activities on the lunar surface. That's like spending 800 hours out there, exploring and having a blast. Besides that, NASA initiated the Breakthrough, Innovative, and Game-Changing Idea Challenge in 2021. It was open to clever university students from all over the world. These young minds put their thinking caps on and unleashed a wave of innovative solutions. For example, they proposed using special fibers that conduct electricity, inspired by fluffy chinchilla hair. Just like how chinchillas stay dust-free, these fibers would help keep the lunar dust at bay. A furry friend lending a helping paw, isn't that adorable? Another bright idea involved an electrically charged brush activated by UV radiation. It's like a magical wand that zaps away the dust with a flick. Abracadabra, lunar dust be gone. And let's not forget the fabric inspired by clever insects. These insects have pollen-collecting structures that repel unwanted dust. So our ingenious students thought, why not mimic that? They designed a fabric with similar properties, creating a shield against the sneaky lunar particles. What's remarkable about these ideas is that they all use the power of charge to fight the dust. They cleverly repel it from the spacesuits, keeping them clean and protected. And even though all these ideas sound pretty great, scientists in NASA unleashed another, even better solution: carbon nanotubes. It's a great way to revolutionize spacesuit fabric. What makes these carbon nanotubes so special? Well, they possess some amazing superpowers. First off, they're superconductive, meaning they can carry electricity like nobody's business. It's like having a lightning bolt trapped inside a microscopic tube. Not only that, but these carbon nanotubes are tougher than the toughest meteors. They have the strength to withstand the harsh lunar environment, where even a speck of dust can cause trouble. Imagine having a suit made of a material that's stronger than Superman's cape. So, NASA's scientists decided to weave these extraordinary carbon nanotubes into the spacesuit fabric. The electrodes were carefully integrated into the outer layer of the fabric, making it a force to be reckoned with. But how do they banish the lunar dust? Well, here comes electrifying science again. When activated by a special alternating current, the electrodes create powerful electric fields. These fields work like magnets, repelling both charged and uncharged dust particles away from the spacesuit. Picture this like a dance party, where the dust particles are the uninvited guests, and the electric fields are the bouncers, swiftly escorting them out. Thanks to this technology, lunar dust doesn't stand a chance against our astronauts. Also on the bright side, the lunar soil can be used to make bricks for shelters. It can also help extract oxygen for astronauts to survive on the moon for long periods of time. When life gives you lemons, make a lemonade, right? So, let's cheer on our NASA Dream Team as they embark on this epic lunar quest. Let's hope that they succeed in their findings, and the next moon mission won't be a big problem. Stay tuned.
It's probably one of the worst nightmares for an astronaut, to float away to outer space without any hope to return. Just imagine slowly moving away from the International Space Station into an endless black void because of some accident, somewhere where there's absolutely nothing but a cold vacuum. Fortunately, you still have an opportunity to survive. Let's have a detailed look at the moment when this can happen. So, you're on the International Space Station. It's now at an altitude of about 250 miles in the upper layers of the atmosphere. It's important to mention that it's not just hanging out there in space. Earth's gravity is constantly pulling on the station. Not to fall, the station needs to fly around our planet at a speed of about 17,000 miles per hour. That speed is fast enough to help the station fight the planet's pull. But on the ISS, when you go into outer space, you don't feel this speed. It seems to you that you're floating in one place, watching Earth spin. But there's still a lot of space debris that moves in the opposite direction. From the point of view of a person on the ISS, the speed of these objects is incredibly fast. You put on a spacesuit. It has oxygen supplies and is equipped with a water compartment so you can drink during the mission. So, you're about to walk into space. First, you need to go through a special door called an airlock. Once you're inside, you see that there are two doors here. You enter and close the first door to block access to the space station's oxygen. Then you open the door leading to space. What you're about to do is called a spacewalk. There are several reasons why you might be in outer space right now. You may be conducting scientific experiments to find out how different things behave in space. Also, you can be testing new equipment, sensors, and other high-tech gizmos. Another reason might be the repair of failed parts or routine maintenance of the International Space Station. Before taking a step into the void, you attach your spacesuit to a rope connected to the body of the ship. You can also fasten small cables to your tools, such as a screwdriver or a wrench, so that you don't lose them. You push off the ship and experience a feeling similar to swimming underwater. By the way, before going out into a zero-gravity area, astronauts train inside a huge swimming pool. You hold on to the parts of the ship and head to the place that needs to be repaired. Let's say you need to tighten a small screw. One astronaut once said that any work in outer space is difficult. You're wearing a huge suit that slows down your movements and makes you clumsy. It also makes your skin itchy. The work can last up to several hours. During this time, you sweat a lot. One of the spacesuit filters may be broken. In this case, all the fluid released by your body can spread all over the suit and reach your face. Your eyes may start watering. Tears will make your vision blurry. As you see, dozens of dangers are lurking out there in open space, and there are no clear instructions on how to deal with most of them. Anyway, you're tightening the screw, but something goes wrong. The wrench jumps out of your hand, and the screw flies out of the hull of the ship. You try to catch it, and accidentally push off the station. You manage to grab the screw, but your body is already flying away. You have nothing to hold on to, but you have the rope. And oh no, it's not tied to your spacesuit anymore. You've attached it incorrectly. Now you're not just flying away from the station, your body is also spinning. The views of blue Earth and black space switch in front of your eyes. You can't stop. Fortunately, the cable is not the only safety measure. Your spacesuit is equipped with a SAFER, Simplified Aid for EVA Rescue. This is a backpack with fuel that works like a jetpack. You activate the backpack, and it levels your flight. You stop spinning and calm down a bit. Now, you know exactly where the ISS is located. Next, you have to choose the direction manually and fly up to the station very carefully. The SAFER releases gas from small tubes, and this makes you fly forward. Using the SAFER control panel that looks similar to a joystick, you can change the direction in which the gas is released. This way, you'll steer your spacesuit. Make sure the station is in your line of sight. Press the joystick to activate the tubes, but take your time. You have to stabilize your forward movement. Pressing the wrong button can cause you to spin again, and this will reduce your chances of returning. Each astronaut spends many hours in a virtual reality simulator that makes them feel like being in outer space. So know how to control the SAFER. You're approaching the station at a slow pace. Don't let the backpack speed you up. If you start to accelerate, you need to point the tubes in the opposite direction to slow yourself down. If you fly too fast, you can crash into the station and damage the spacesuit. You've finally arrived at the ISS. You need to cling to something and move toward the airlock. You feel as if you're climbing a mountain underwater. You get to the airlock. Phew! Well, let's go back in time to the moment when you were flying away from the ISS. So, you tried to use the backpack to level your movement. You're nervous and can't calm down. You randomly press the joystick and chaotically direct the tubes in different directions. A few minutes pass. You haven't come closer to the station, and the fuel in the SAFER has run out. Now, you're even more nervous. Let's go back in time again. You float away from the ISS. Then use the SAFER and slow down the rotation speed of your body. Now you're facing the ISS. You approach the station with slow but steady thrusts. Everything is going well, but at one moment, you notice some movement. This is a small piece of metal from an old satellite. It crashes into the SAFER and slices through the backpack. Fuel starts leaking out into space. You start spinning again because of the impact. You don't understand which way you are moving. All you need now is to take a deep breath and use the remaining fuel to stop. Done. You're floating without rotating. There are no instructions and protocols that will help you get out of this situation. You're moving in outer space and can control this process. To return to the ISS, you need to push off something. Fortunately, you have time to think about what to do next. Your spacesuit has oxygen reserves that are enough for several hours. Also, you have water. You can drink it through a small rubber straw attached to the inside of your helmet neck ring. You're the first human in history who got into such a situation. But this doesn't mean there's no chance of survival. If you could throw something to the side, it'd set you in motion. For example, if you had a heavy wrench, you could throw it in the opposite direction from the ISS. This way, you'd launch yourself toward the station. But unfortunately, you have nothing to throw. You have your broken SAFER, but you can't remove it without another person's assistance. You enjoy the beautiful view of Earth and try to breathe as slowly as possible to save oxygen. It seems there's no chance left for you. But at this moment, other astronauts call you using the radio. They see your location and are going to save you. Your colleague is heading in your direction. She's attached securely to two long cables. She's going to give you one of them when she reaches you. Using the SAFER, the astronaut flies in your direction. She's very close. Finally, she slows down and grabs your hand. She unhooks one of the cables from her spacesuit and attaches it to yours. Using the cable, you approach the station. At this moment, a rusty bolt flies by. The main danger is that space debris can break through your spacesuit and tear the rope. You accelerate and reach the airlock, and then you open the door and dive inside. One of the most dangerous space missions has been completed. Theoretically, there's another way to save you. A spacecraft delivering food and air supplies to the ISS can pick you up and bring you back to the station. But this mission is even more difficult, as it requires a very precise route calculation. If something goes wrong, the spaceship can kick you. In this case, you will fly away at high speed. You can travel for several hours until you run out of oxygen, or a piece of space debris destroys your spacesuit. Fortunately, all astronauts are well-trained and experienced enough to avoid such accidents.
Traveling at about 17,000 miles per hour, 250 miles above the Earth, astronauts watch 16 sunrises and sunsets every day while floating around in a box with a handful of people they depend on for survival. Whether humans should set off to other worlds beyond Earth or not, one of the most compelling drawbacks is this: our bodies don't like it. Few people know this better than the NASA astronaut who spent nearly a year on the International Space Station from 2015 to 2016, Scott Kelly. Like other astronauts, Mr. Kelly served as a test subject in the study of space travel's effects on the human body. Unlike other astronauts, Mr. Kelly has an identical twin, Mark, who is an astronaut himself. This gave researchers an uncommon opportunity to monitor the two brothers as they lived in two very different environments, one on Earth and the other 250 miles above it. When the astronaut went into space and his slightly older twin brother Mark stayed on Earth, the age gap between them increased thanks to his time in orbit. And it's all down to Einstein's theory of relativity. What it suggests is that time moves more slowly for objects in motion than it does for a stationary observer. It also moves more slowly the closer you are to a gravitational mass like Earth. In other words, we're not all experiencing time at the same rate. The faster you move and accelerate, the more time slows down. And because Mr. Kelly has been zooming up to and down from space and orbiting the planet at around 17,500 miles per hour, his brother Mark has lived through 0.005 extra seconds. The brothers were born 6 seconds apart back in 1964, and now that gap is 6.005 seconds. This warping of time is known as time dilation, and the Kelly brothers qualify for both aspects of it: how fast they've been moving in relation to one another and how close they are to a big object, which is Earth. So, depending on our position and speed, time can appear to move faster or slower to us relative to others in a different part of space-time. And for astronauts on the International Space Station, that means they get to age just a tiny bit slower than people on Earth. That doesn't mean you could spend your life in a basement just to outlive the rest of us here on the surface. The effect isn't noticeable on such a small scale. If you became a basement hermit, then across your entire lifetime, you'd only age a fraction of a second slower than everyone else above ground. But your brain might freeze when you think about this. A watch strapped to your ankle will eventually fall behind one strapped to your wrist. Your head technically ages more quickly than your feet. Time passes faster for people living on a mountain than those living at sea level. The classic example for this is the twin scenario. One twin blasts off in a spaceship, traveling close to the speed of light, and the other stays behind on Earth. When the space-traveling twin returns to Earth, she's only aged a couple of years. But she's shocked to find that her Earthbound sister has aged over a decade. Of course, no one has performed that experiment in real life, but there's evidence that it's real. When scientists launched an atomic clock into orbit and back, while keeping an identical clock here on Earth, it returned running ever so slightly behind the Earthbound clock. Then time gets even more complicated, because time dilation can happen anytime. A good way to think about it is to consider the astronauts living on the International Space Station. They're floating about 260 miles above where Earth's gravitational pull is weaker than it is at the surface. That means time should speed up for them relative to the people on the ground. But the space station is also whizzing around Earth at about nearly 5 miles per second. That means time should also slow down for the astronauts relative to people on the surface. But the reality is that Mark, the brother who's aged a few milliseconds longer, could end up better off in the long run if Mr. Kelly's extended time in space causes his body to deteriorate faster. 10 science teams in NASA's twin study examined the brothers' astronauts before, during, and after the astronauts' 340 days in space. The teams studied each twin's bodily functions, they ran memory tests, and they examined the men's genes, looking what differences might be due to space travel. They confirmed that lengthy space travel stresses the human body in many ways. Space living can change genes and send the immune system into overdrive. It can dull mind and memory. Most changes that the astronaut experienced in space reversed once he returned to Earth, but not everything. The researchers tested him again after 6 months back on land. Roughly 91% of the genes that had changed activity in space were now back to normal. The rest stayed in space mode. His immune system, for instance, remained on high alert. DNA repair genes were still overly active, and some of his chromosomes were still topsy-turvy. What's more, the astronaut's mental abilities had declined from pre-flight levels. He was slower and less accurate on short-term memory and logic tests. It's unclear whether these results are definitely from spaceflight. That's partly because the observations are from only one person. But one thing is sure, time is relative. Think of it this way. If a clock is stationary and you are traveling at a very high speed, you happen to pass by this clock and have a glimpse at it, you'll see that it's running slowly, or maybe it's completely static. This is because the speed at which the mechanical functions of the clock are working slower than you. What you see is the time in the past, while you have already skipped that second and are in the future. During this experiment of high-speed traveling, you haven't aged at all, because all the processes in your body are working at the same speed as you. After a certain age, your body starts to deteriorate, which eventually leads to a state when it stops functioning. This aging phenomenon, especially in humans, is caused by a protein structure in the cells called telomeres. These structures protect our cells from deteriorating, but with each cell replication, these telomeres start to lose strength, which is called telomere length. If the telomere length shortens to a certain extent, the cell becomes vulnerable to diseases. We can say that telomeres are the natural countdown timers in our bodies, which determine when we will expire. The telomere length can be affected by external factors like stress, which accelerates our timer. The twin study experiment by NASA included documenting the changes in telomere length of both brothers. The telomere length of the space brother increased while he was aboard the International Space Station. Before the mission, both brothers had nearly the same telomere lengths, meaning if we ignore issues like mental stress, both brothers should live roughly an equal age. But while the space brother was orbiting the Earth, he had almost 14.5% longer telomere length. The space brother was a few years younger than his ground brother biologically. Because the telomere length of the space brother resumed to normal when he came back to Earth, it took almost 190 days after return for the telomere length to restore to expected. The blood samples from the International Space Station were sent back to Earth for processing. This means the blood wasn't traveling at the speed of the ISS anymore. Also, the space-time paradox states that the space brother should be younger upon return. But the telomere length restored to its original state before the mission. The space brother was again the same age as his ground brother. A lack of gravity is the main cause for these intense changes in aging. Gravity plays an immense role in the majority of our bodily systems. Take the muscles, for example. Older people's muscles tend to shrink and decline as they age and become less mobile. Astronauts' muscles react in a similar way because they are barely used. That's why astronauts staying in space for extended periods of time use special exercise machines to help reduce this effect. A similar process takes place in the bones. After a certain age, people on Earth start to lose mass in their bones, typically at a rate of about 1 to 2% a year. But in space, those people lose bone mass at a greatly accelerated rate, as much as 1 to 2% a month. Because the astronauts' bodies don't need to support their weight, the bones begin to decrease production of new bone material and increase the amount of old bone absorption. Luckily, their skeletal systems usually return to normal once they've spent some time back on our blue planet. If the space brother was shielded from all harms of space, like radiations, while orbiting the ISS, then he would have lived longer than his ground brother. Even though they're saving 0.005 seconds, astronauts still experience some of the symptoms of a drawn-out aging process. So the next time you find yourself wishing the weekend would last longer, stay low to the ground and move really fast. It won't feel like your weekend got any longer, but technically, you may gain a teeny tiny fraction of a second. You won't need to go to space for this little experiment. About a third of all grown-ups have a snake phobia, but if you decide to become an astronaut not to have to deal with them, it might not be a great idea. According to Story Musgrave, there are snakes in space. Musgrave is one of the most experienced astronauts in the world right now. He is the second astronaut who managed to go on 6 space flights and fly on all the space shuttles. With that much experience and time in space, he has to have 1 or 2 space horror stories in his career. Once on a space mission, he looked out of the window and saw something resembling a snake. Musgrave said it was 6 to 8 feet long and looked like a snake, but many people don't believe his story. They claim it was some trash floating in space or something that had detached from the spacecraft. But the astronaut went on another mission and saw the creature again. The first time he spotted it, it could be some detached piece from the spacecraft. But what are the chances of that happening twice? He gave many interviews in which he explained these crazy encounters. Let's hope those snakes stay in space and don't come crashing down on Earth. If they are real, of course. Snake rain would not be fun. As we all know, space is like a giant vacuum chamber with 0 air, and sound can't travel there, making this story even more terrifying. To communicate, astronauts have a special system in their suits to exchange information. Young Li Wei shared his terrifying experience, and it's hard to believe it actually happened. You would be terrified if you were alone at home and someone started knocking on your door at night. Of course, if you weren't expecting anyone. Imagine the same scenario, but you're in space. You hear some knocking, you have nowhere to run, you're trapped in a metal can floating into nothingness. Young was sitting in his spacecraft, minding his own business, when he suddenly heard knocking coming from outside. How is it possible? Sound can't travel in space. The noise was unique. The astronaut described it as if someone had been knocking on an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. Li Wei looked outside, but to his surprise, there was nothing there. He investigated a bit more, but couldn't find the source of the sound. When Young returned to Earth, he was eager to tell scientists about what had happened, but he could not recreate the sound. To add fuel to the fire, his colleagues, who were on the same mission from 2005 to 2008, said they had also heard knocking similar to what Young had reported. This is still a mystery. Nobody knows what happened then. Maybe it was just spacecraft noise, like those your house randomly makes. We've already mentioned that sound can't travel in space, but that doesn't stop weird noises. The Apollo 10 mission was one of the most significant space missions ever. So, astronauts had to ensure everything was perfect before they went on a moon exploration journey. 3 people were on that mission: Thomas Stafford, module pilot John Young, and lunar module pilot Eugene Cernan. They had to do tons of gear tests for the upcoming Apollo 11 missions. The astronauts were circling the moon when they heard music coming from somewhere. It wasn't like Ed Sheeran's concert, it was more like constant loud screaming. Then, it was quiet whistling. They were terrified. Imagine being in space for the first time and hearing weird noises. The sounds lasted for a whole hour. The astronauts had never heard anything like that before. The sound was otherworldly and creepy. When they returned to Earth, they didn't know if they should tell someone about their experience because it was hard to believe. Michael Collins, an astronaut from the Apollo 11 mission, later shared that he had also heard this sound. But there is a kind of logical explanation for this. Engineers from NASA said that the sound that they had heard had been caused by the interference with the communication system. So you can relax and throw your tinfoil hat in the trash. But before you do that, Al Worden, an astronaut from the Apollo 15 mission, said that this explanation was unlikely, so we might never find out what really caused the sound. Leroy Chow was the commander of the International Space Station in 2005. When it comes to space, he's seen a lot of things that can send chills down your spine. One encounter he and his crew had will live on in their head rent-free forever. Chow was sitting in the space station doing his job when he suddenly spotted light from the corner of his eye. He took a closer look, and it resembled an upside-down V, floating and glowing in space. Leroy later explained that he hadn't been scared by the object. Quite the opposite. He was extremely excited to see it, even though he had no idea what it was. His crew also saw the strange object. Chow was convinced he was visited by something not from Earth. His team could also vouch that indeed they saw something unexplainable. The information about this encounter is all over the internet, and many people are skeptical. It could have been anything. There are more than 10,000 satellites in space right now. It could have been a satellite floating in space. Another theory is that those were lights reflecting from a fishing boat on Earth. But who knows? There may be another logical explanation for this phenomenon waiting to be discovered. Horror stories don't stop there. This one is hard to believe, and it's up to you to figure out if it's true. Astronaut Alan Bean was the fourth individual to set foot on the moon's surface. When he was on the Apollo 12 mission, he claimed he saw a unique shape on the moon. It was shiny and shaped like a shoe. It's hard to know what he saw because he passed away in 2018. Chinese lunar rover Yutu 2 also discovered some shiny substance on the moon. Scientists say it was something gel-like. It could be a glaze that formed when something impacted the moon's surface, like a meteorite or something else. But in the future, we might find a better explanation for this strange find. This may sound wicked, but many countries send animals to space before humans follow them. Take Miss Baker, a squirrel monkey, Ham the chimp, and many more. Many of these animals returned to Earth safely and lived happily ever after, like Ham the chimp that lived for 26 years. But some weren't so lucky. Astronauts are still creeped out when they see animals floating in space. Imagine seeing something like that in a dark vacuum. No matter how tough you are, after that, you will be afraid of your own shadow. This may be sad, but it was an essential step in space exploration. The following horror story comes from space engineer Musa Manarov. This guy came across something that made scientists confused. He was shooting a video of space when he accidentally filmed some shiny object flying in the distance. The thing had a cylindrical shape, and Manarov thought it was something that had detached from the spacecraft. But he was unsure because it moved in a unique way. When you think of a creepy space story, the first thing that comes to your mind is some creature crawling on the spacecraft, or some weird object flying in space. But all those things are highly unlikely to happen. When somebody asked Chris Hadfield what the scariest thing about space was, he said it was asteroids. There are thousands of them in space, and the spacecraft is constantly getting hit by them. Chris said that he'd always heard sounds from asteroids hitting his spacecraft. He also mentioned that the spacecraft's solar panels were covered with holes. And you never know whether a giant asteroid will come and hit your spacecraft. It's dark outside, almost 2 a.m. You go outside and look at the sky, and here it is, bright, full moon. You might think you know a lot about Earth's natural satellite, but let me ask you this: how did it form? The answer is nobody knows. But of course, there are theories. The most popular one, called the giant impact theory, claims that the moon formed during a collision between Earth and another planet. This planet must have been smaller than ours, the size of Mars, and the collision itself probably happened around 4.5 billion years ago. Another theory, called the capture theory, claims that the moon used to be an asteroid or some other wandering body. It formed somewhere else in the solar system. When it was passing by Earth, it got caught by our planet's gravity. But here is one catch. Our planet and the moon have remarkable isotopic and chemical similarities. So, they must have a linked history, which means the moon couldn't have been created elsewhere. Other experts think that at some point in the past, Earth was spinning so fast that some of its material broke away. It soon started to orbit our planet. That's how the moon appeared in the sky. But again, there's one problem. In this case, the proportion and type of minerals on the moon would have to be the same as on Earth. But there are slight differences. The moon is richer in materials that form very fast at high temperatures. There's one more theory, and it's probably the least exciting. It claims that Earth's natural satellite could simply appear along with Earth during our planet's formation. Duh! But these days, a more urgent question keeps astronomers busy. Is the moon really Earth's satellite? Or are these two twin planets? The moon is big compared to our planet, about 1/4 of Earth's size. That's why some experts refer to our planetary system as a double planet. But how correct is that? If we want to figure it out, we need to give the definition to the word planet. According to the International Astronomical Union, a planet is a space body that orbits the Sun, is massive enough to have a nearly round shape thanks to its gravity, and has cleared the region around its orbit. Now, what about a satellite? It's an object in space that orbits around a larger celestial body. If we take the system Earth, the Moon, its center of gravity, called a barycenter, is inside the Earth. That's why at the moment we can't say that we live in a twin planet system. According to this definition, the Moon is the satellite of our planet. Now, let's get back to the past, like 3 or 4 billion years ago. Even though the Moon wasn't a planet, it most likely had a full-fledged atmosphere. It formed at times when powerful volcanic eruptions were rocking our satellite. Gases spread all over the Moon's surface, and it happened so fast that they didn't have enough time to escape into space. At that time, the lunar surface was covered with basins filled with volcanic basalt. Just imagine ginormous plumes of magma hurtling high into the air, falling to the ground and creating lava flows. That's how the basalt basins appeared on the surface of the Moon. At one point, scientists got their hands on samples brought from the Moon. They found out that lava flows there contained not only carbon monoxide and sulfur, but also the building blocks of water. Thanks to these samples, researchers managed to calculate the amount of gas that rose and formed the atmosphere. It became the thickest around 3.5 billion years ago and existed for about 70 million years. After that, poof, the atmosphere was lost in space. But the coolest thing? When the Moon did have an atmosphere, the satellite was 3 to 10 times closer to our planet. One computer simulation even suggests the Moon was probably up to 19 times closer than it is now. The distance between it and our planet could be 18,600 miles, while these days our satellite is around 240,000 miles away. That's why the Moon looked much, much bigger in the sky. Unfortunately, at that time, not even dinos were around to admire the view. These days, the atmosphere of the Moon is almost non-existent, and that's why the satellite can't protect itself from meteorites. The surface of the Moon is dotted with craters. For comparison, there are about 190 identified impact craters on our planet. Many of them are hidden by vegetation or covered with water. But if we speak about the Moon, the number is so much greater, several million, and around 5,000 of them are more than 12 miles across. And since the Moon is less seismically active than Earth, these craters and other ancient formations stay in perfect condition for centuries. When you look at the Moon, it's the brightest object in the night sky. But in reality, its surface is dark because the reflectance of our natural satellite is just a bit higher than that of asphalt. You might know that the Moon's gravitational pull causes tides on our planet, making the oceans bulge out on both the side closest to the Moon and the one farthest from the satellite. But that's not all. The Moon also slows down Earth's rotation. This phenomenon is known as tidal braking. It increases the length of a day on Earth by a bit more than 2 milliseconds per 100 years. The moon is also moving away from Earth at the same rate at which your fingernails grow. That's about 1.5 inches per year. If one day the moon floats away into space, our planet will have to live through tough times. Without the stabilizing pull of the moon's gravity, Earth's tilt would start changing wildly from no tilt at all, meaning no seasons, to a large tilt, resulting in extreme weather. Even though the moon's surface is mostly dormant, Earth's natural satellite still experiences moonquakes. One theory suggests that they may be happening because the moon is shrinking as its insides are cooling. Scientists say that the moon has become around 150 feet skinnier than it used to be several hundred million years ago. To help you understand it, picture a grape turning into a raisin. It wrinkles while shrinking. The same is happening to the moon. It's shrinking and it's wrinkling. But unlike the grape, the moon doesn't have flexible skin. Its surface is hard and brittle, so as the moon gets smaller, the crust cracks and breaks, and its sections get pushed over neighboring parts. Want to know another cool thing about the moon? A recent study claims that it has a tail, and every month it wraps around our planet like a scarf. This slender tail is made up of millions of atoms of sodium, and our planet regularly travels directly through it. Meteor strikes blast these sodium atoms out of the moon's surface and further into space. For several days every month, the moon remains between the sun and our planet. That's when Earth's gravity picks that sodium tail. Our planet drags it into a long stripe that wraps around its atmosphere. This lunar tail is totally harmless. It's also invisible to the human eye, 50 times dimmer than what you can perceive. But during those rare days, high-powered telescopes can spot its faint yellowish glow in the sky. The tail looks like a gleaming spot that's 5 times the full moon's diameter. And the spiciest fact for you, 2 or 3 years ago, an asteroid was pulled into Earth's orbit and started to travel around the planet. Even though it was no larger than an average car, it was still a big deal. Out of more than 1 million asteroids astronomers know about, it was only the second one to orbit our planet, called 2020 CD3. It was our temporary mini-moon. It didn't stay with Earth for long, though. The asteroid followed a random orbit and slowly drifted away. Temporarily captured objects such as 2020 CD3 are rare. They need to have a specific direction and speed to be caught by Earth's gravitational pull. Otherwise, they either crash into the planet or fly in another direction. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be ready to take off in 3, 2, 1. Living on a spaceship sounds like a sci-fi movie topic, but gradually turns into a plan for the distant future dream. Let's imagine how it would be. Without further ado, I'll start with the light. On Earth, thanks to the atmosphere, the sky scatters the sunlight, so we get light in different directions. Then there are shadows, contrast, and ambient light. In a spaceship, however, there's no sky to create that cool ambient light. When you're in a spacecraft inside a solar system, one side of the ship can be lightened by the sun or another star, and one side can stay in the shadow. You can think of it as the crescent moon. If your spacecraft manages to go far away from any solar system, you might say goodbye to the bright side of the ship. You would be very far from all stars, so the ship is going to fly in the deep darkness. Don't worry though, the advanced technology will probably find a way to imitate the sunlight. Maybe designers will place LED light panels similar to windows, and inhabitants of the ship wouldn't notice the difference. What about people? A study revealed that a crew of 160 people could create a viable population for 200 years. Here, the important thing is to select the crew members from a large gene pool. No 2 passengers should be closer than 6th or 7th degree cousins. This is a projection from our day. Who knows, maybe hundreds of years later, whole countries will live in a spaceship. Your neighbor country in the world will be your neighbor in space. This reminds me of the scene from Thor: Ragnarok. When the Asgardians who survived Hela escaped with the Grandmaster's ship, they went to Earth to settle down. Maybe we would go to Proxima Centauri b. It's an exoplanet, which is the term used to define planets beyond our solar system. Proxima b is in another star system, and some scientists do believe it has the potential. Some of them believe that there's a possibility that liquid water exists on the surface of a planet. It's important because this planet is our nearest neighboring exoplanet. Yeah, the nearest one, but it's almost 25 trillion miles away. To better understand this proximity, I'll give you a comparison. Currently, one of the fastest spaceships, called New Horizons, goes a whopping speed of more than 30,000 miles per hour. But even with this speed, it would take thousands of years to get to Proxima b. Let's hope we figure out how to warp the space-time equation by then. If I'm realistic, the first option is more likely. Let's assume we made a trip with our fastest spaceships. This would still be a couple of 100-year journey. This leads to another minor problem: the lifespan of humans. The same crew cannot make it to the end of the ride. Here, generation ships shine as a solution. A community of adults enter the ship, then their children, and their children. You know, until humanity finally reaches the new planet. There are two other alternatives. If researchers somehow made a way to make people live for centuries, we wouldn't need generation ships. Similarly, there could be a system to freeze people. It'll take 20,000 people to start a healthy population on a new planet. For now, I want to stick with the first scenario. Here's how it would be to live in a generation spacecraft. Dating wouldn't be as romantic as it is on Earth. There's probably a geneticist who will regulate reproduction. Freedom of choice in general would be decreased. The rules will be strict. In every generation, there should be certain tasks to manage. Someone should be a doctor, and someone else should be a plumber. New generations may go under a career planning test. Everyone would be assigned occupations based on their merits, aptitude, passions, and available jobs. It reminds me of Snowpiercer, but hopefully things would go humanely and better in this version. People all need water, and they'll create waste. By then, maybe we wouldn't rely on plastic. Plus, recycling may be on another level. Still, we will need water. A healthy human needs almost 300 gallons of water per year. It's not like they'll stop by on a planet and refill the water reserves. So how can spaceship residents solve this problem? There are already systems to recycle some astronauts' waste into pure water. The next issue is infirmary. A spaceship might have almost no bacteria or microbes. People need them for a stronger immune system. If they get too isolated and land on a planet, they may have difficulty coping with the potential conditions there. Shielding carries importance too. Deep space is a radioactive place. Our planet has a magnetic field that protects us from DNA frying waves. Out in the open, the spaceship will need a strong shield. Maybe we'll be able to create some sort of force field. NASA is working on systems to grow plants in space. We will probably see special sections dedicated to farming and livestock. I also feel like this type of ship would also carry flora and fauna samples too. Who knows, maybe there'll be specific parks and different mini ecosystems. This would be great for the sanity of people on the ship. I mean, it's great to maintain the existence of the human race, but existential crises can mess with the passengers. They can eat their space sandwiches in the park and relax a bit with the sound of tweeting birds. Not just a garden, the young passengers might need a playground and school. Well, in this case, cabins, to get an education. They'll probably have a whole new curriculum, How to Stay Alive on a Foreign Planet 101. protect themselves from potentially hostile life forms. Once they successfully arrive, they need tools to build their homes too. When they finally arrive at their new planet, they might start advanced technology to travel around other planets. Hi, Mom! I brought you a rock as a gift from the surface of Mars. There could be new occupations and a live space travel guide, and we might need some type of document like a visa to enter other habitable planets. There's a meteorite rain expected, so stay at your base for the next 2 years, says the newscaster. Okay, I'll calm down here. So how would you picture a vessel capable of ferrying humans from one solar system to another? Would it have some sort of wings, or would it look like a rocket? Tell me more about the design in your mind.
When you think of astronauts going to space, you probably imagine those cool things they can do up there. First of all, it's flying like a superhero all the time. Astronauts hold onto rails and use their arm strength to move among modules. It probably takes some time to get used to this way of moving around, but in a couple of months in space, they can become real acrobats. They also read books, watch movies, or take awesome pictures of Earth through the cupola windows, which is a special viewing area on the space station. They also invent new games, like the one where they try to hit a target, or where they race one another from one end of the station to the other as fast as they can. And zero-gravity sports must be so cool. Imagine playing soccer up there. It's the only way I'd ever be able to do a bicycle kick properly. It's cool how they eat or try to catch a bite from a floating spoon. But besides all these fun things, they need to sleep too. And that's not so easy in space. Not having gravity can be cool when you fool around and fly across your chamber, but it's definitely not that great when you're tired and can't wait for your head to hit the pillow. Because in space, that won't happen. Instead, astronauts have to sleep in small sleeping bags attached to the wall. This way they won't float around or potentially bump into things while they're sleeping. No sleepwalkers up there, only sleep floaters. Astronaut orbited our home planet a whopping 17 times in a spacecraft, proving humans could live, work, and sleep in space. But just because it's possible doesn't mean it's easy. Some astronauts described their space capsule as a small garbage can, and the cabin itself is about the size of the front seat of a Volkswagen Beetle. Sleeping in space is very different from sleeping on Earth, to say the least. There is no up or down in space, so astronauts can choose any position they find comfortable. On the International Space Station, sleeping quarters are about the size of a phone booth. It's a tight space, and it doesn't look as cool as the rest of the things up there, but they make it work. Astronauts have to sleep near an air vent to make sure they have good ventilation. Breathing is trickier in space because the carbon dioxide they breathe out can form a bubble around their heads, which can be problematic since they may not get enough oxygen. Astronauts cover up windows to block out sunlight and may wear sleep masks, just like some people on Earth do to block out light. The sun in space can be really bright, even with window shades, because there's no atmosphere to filter sunlight. Oh, those things we take for granted down here. Also, the space station orbits Earth every 90 minutes, so astronauts get to see a new sunrise every hour and a half. The station can be noisy too, since they have all those fans and other equipment, so astronauts sometimes wear earplugs to help them sleep. We all become grumpy if we don't get enough sleep, with or without gravity. Not just that. A lack of sleep can affect our blood pressure, immune system, balance, and health in general. And it's way trickier when you're not feeling well up there than on Earth. NASA schedules its astronauts for about 8 to 8.5 hours of sleep per day. But those who work on the ISS, on average, go with 6 hours of sleep, because the space environment can disrupt their natural sleep patterns. That's why it's not so unusual to have insomnia and sleep deprivation when in space. Astronauts sometimes have changes in their schedules. They have to work long shifts or finish tasks assigned at night. All this works against good sleep. That's why NASA has sleep education and promotes special relaxation techniques to help crew members sleep better. Dreams and nightmares are as common in space as they are on Earth. You just can't get away from your mind making up different scenarios while you're sleeping. And you know that feeling when you first wake up all groggy and sluggish? It's like your body and brain are still trying to catch up and fully wake up. You might feel a little bit disoriented, plus it might be hard for you to think clearly or move quickly. It's called sleep inertia. This feeling usually goes away after a little while, but it's probably way harder to get rid of it in space because many astronauts have issues with it. And even if you had perfect conditions for sleep, just being in space would probably disrupt your body's natural sleep-wake cycle. Two things regulate this cycle: the S process and circadian rhythms. The S process controls whether we are asleep or awake throughout the day. In space, your body gets less deep sleep, which means it goes through some changes in the S process. Circadian rhythms help regulate our internal body clock as well. In space, where such cues as exposure to light and darkness are a complete mess, you can't simply set your alarm clock at 7 a.m. every morning. At least up there, I'd have a good excuse for not doing this. To help astronauts adjust, NASA has added special lighting inside the space station, which mimics a regular day on Earth. They try to block out outside light at night and provide enough light during the day to help astronauts stay awake and sleep at the right times as much as possible. Astronauts need to be careful not to get exposed to blue light from electronic devices because that disrupts sleep too. That tip sounds familiar. We need to figure out as many tricks as possible to get better sleep because we don't want to go on a mission to Mars and come to our potential new home all grumpy and moody. Plus, people who will go on these special space missions won't have as much space as astronauts on the ISS. Their quarters may not be like the comfortable bedrooms they have back on Earth, but they will still be dark, quiet, and best of all, private. At the same time, say goodbye to privacy on your way to the moon. On such missions, there will be less space for crew members to sleep. It will be like camping with your friends, but with not enough tents. And imagine jet lag in space. It usually hits astronauts even before they get to the space station. To help with this, they start adjusting their sleep schedules a few days before they launch into space. They change their sleeping and waking times to match the time of day and time zone of their launch location. Once they reach the space station, where astronauts from different countries work together, they all switch to using a common time called Greenwich Mean Time, GMT. This helps everyone synchronize their schedules because it's a middle ground time that can be easily understood by people from different parts of the world. So to help crew members have better sleep, scientists have simulated space missions on Earth. They have a special habitat called Hera at Johnson Space Center, which is almost the same size as a lunar base or spacecraft. Crews live there for certain periods, and researchers study their sleep patterns and performance. NASA is planning a cool experiment called the Crew Health and Performance Exploration Analog, SHAPEA. The first mission is supposed to start soon with 4 crew members, a commander, a medical officer, a flight engineer, and a science officer, living in a habitat called Mars Dune Alpha at NASA's Johnson Space Center. They will live in the 3D-printed habitat and exercise, cook, clean, do other things, and collect data just like they would on the Red Planet. I mean, we still have a decade or two till the first human missions on Mars, but we better hurry and prepare well.
We still can't find the source of the mysterious signal we've been receiving since 2018. We receive it every 22 minutes, and nothing can explain this. Some scientists even believe it could be coming from another civilization we haven't met yet. This strange radio signal wasn't found by a scientist on a serious mission. It was actually discovered by a college student just doing a regular project for school. Tyrone O'Doherty, an undergrad student at Curtin University in Australia, was sifting through old data of the southern sky. He was looking for any weird blinking radio signals. He finally stumbled upon one from 2018 that seemed to shoot radio waves towards Earth like a lighthouse beam. Excited about his find, Tyrone shared it with his mentor, radio astronomer Natasha Hurley-Walker. She dove into researching this signal, hoping for a breakthrough. But despite checking different frequency data, they hit a dead end. But then, Natasha spotted a pattern. The signal repeated every 18 minutes. This was huge. But just as they were gearing up to study it further, poof! The signal vanished after only 3 months, leaving them with nothing. Not giving up, Natasha and her team scanned the skies again, desperate for a clue. Months passed, but nothing turned up. They were ready to give up, and then suddenly, a new signal popped up. This one kept blinking for 5 minutes, then it disappeared. And then it came back exactly 22 minutes later. The main question was if that signal was related to an 18-minute one. To figure it out, Natasha went back to the old radio data from that area. As they dug deeper, They realized that, yes, and these signals aren't anything new. They've been beaming towards Earth for 35 years. Back in 1988, Indian and American telescopes had caught them, but they got buried under tons of other data. This was great news for space explorers because it meant they could now calculate how far away this mysterious object was. After doing the math, they figured out it was incredibly far, even on a space scale, 15,000 light-years from Earth. Now, the only thing left to uncover was what exactly this object was. Walker and his team started comparing it to all the known radio-emitting objects out there. Yet its source remains a mystery. The signals still pop up every 22 minutes on NASA screens, always ending with a frustrating match not found message. The scientists called it J183910. Some think that the signal might come from some extraterrestrial beings. Maybe it's the signal that SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, has been waiting for. This project has been working for over 50 years, trying to find any evidence of life beyond Earth. They also scan the skies for radio waves, laser pulses, and other mysterious signals. So maybe it's a way for extraterrestrial folk to communicate their location. While that idea may sound exciting, we need to be careful about jumping to conclusions. First, we don't have solid proof for that. Before any concrete evidence, it's just speculation. And also, there are other more plausible explanations. Most likely it comes from a natural phenomenon, and there are a couple of theories for that. The first one is the pulsar theory. Imagine a huge star in space, much bigger than our Sun. Sometimes these big stars finish their life journeys in a spectacular event called a supernova. When this happens, the star's core collapses, becoming super compact, as if you're squeezing all the stuff from that star into a tiny space. That tiny, super-dense core is called a neutron star. Some of these neutron stars are extra special. We call them pulsars. They get their name because they seem to pulse with energy, like a space lighthouse. These pulsars have incredibly strong magnetic fields, much stronger than what you'd find on Earth. They're like enormous magnets in space. Because of this, they shoot out beams of energy. They're also spinning super fast, so these beams of energy seem to pulse on and off as they spin around. Now, the strange signal we detected seems to have similarities with pulsars, but not quite. Pulsars usually have a predictable lifespan and slow down over time, eventually stopping their radio signals. In contrast, our mysterious signal is quite persistent and is blinking beyond what's expected for pulsars. So, maybe it's not a typical pulsar, or not a pulsar at all. There's also a magnetar theory. Now, a magnetar is another type of neutron star. They're like supercharged versions of pulsars, with even stronger magnetic fields and slightly longer pulsating periods. Maybe this is what causes our signal's intense persistence. However, when we plotted the data, we also realized the signal didn't match the magnetar's vibes either. Magnetars not only send out radio waves, but also powerful X-rays because they're so energetic. But the signal we received was only sending out radio waves. So we figured it's not a pulsar and not a magnetar. The signal's behavior is very strange and suggests an unnatural source. This means there might be something in the universe that scientists haven't fully explored yet. And there is a space object that we don't know much about. The final theory is the so-called dwarf pulsar. Sounds a little dopey to me. Couldn't help myself. Now, a dwarf pulsar is like a star that blinks with light flashes, similar to pulsars, but it takes longer for each blink. Usually, white dwarfs are the leftovers from smaller stars. They don't blink because their magnetic field isn't as strong as pulsars. But when a white dwarf becomes pretty hefty, almost the mass of our Sun, it gets super dense and starts pulsating with a strong magnetic field, just like pulsars. They have a cool quirk. White dwarfs are made of electrons, not neutrons like pulsars. When these charged electrons start dancing with the magnetic field, they shoot out periodic light flashes, which happen every 100 to 1,000 seconds. As you remember, our signal has a period of 22 minutes, 1,320 seconds, a bit longer than the usual white dwarf pulsars, but it's much closer to the truth. So far, this sounds like the most plausible explanation, but even this theory isn't fully confirmed yet. This just shows how much there is in the universe that we're still figuring out. For example, fast radio bursts, another mysterious type of signal we've been detecting. They're like quick, intense bursts of energy in the form of radio waves. They have a ton of energy. FRBs are so powerful that sometimes they can be brighter than entire galaxies. Now, imagine this. They release as much energy in a few milliseconds as our sun does in 3 whole days. Wow! These bursts happen all over the sky with huge frequencies, although some have been detected with lower frequencies. Every day, we catch around 10,000 random FRBs in the sky. Some of them repeat, but most happen once and disappear forever. Unfortunately, most of them only last for a fraction of a second, and by the time their energy reaches us, it's 1,000 times weaker than a mobile phone signal from the moon. This is why, despite their brightness, there's still a lot we don't understand about them. We're still trying to figure out what causes these FRBs. They could be coming from different sources, like already mentioned magnetars, colliding stars, or even merging galaxies or white dwarfs. As these bursts travel through space, they pick up information about the cosmic environments they pass through, like interstellar gas clouds. It's very unlikely that FRBs are some messages from extraterrestrial beings, though. Not only because there are thousands of them every day all across the sky, but also because we know that the sources of these bursts must be incredibly energetic themselves. Our neighbors would have to have equipment stronger than entire galaxies for that. But the bottom line is, while all these signals are fascinating, there's still a ton to learn about them.
You've been training for this for years. You know you're ready. You're standing on the door's threshold. You take a deep breath and bravely open it. You jump outside the International Space Station and into the vastness of space. Ah, this never gets old, you say on the transmitter device. You feel like a feather whenever moving through space. Except for the suit, of course. It's true what that guy told you one day. Astronaut suits limit your body's movement by 20%. For you, that means you've got a 20% higher chance of being clumsy in outer space, which is never good odds. There's not a lot of room for error during a spacewalk. You finally get to the docking port. You look around and see the part of the station that needs fixing. This is where other space shuttles dock when they come in from Earth or other planets. About a week ago, a shuttle coming from Jupiter miscalculated the landing and broke a piece of the port. You've attached the new shield to your suit's belt. Now all you've got to do is screw it on the station. You've spent hours training underwater to do this. You wore a heavy, hot, uncomfortable suit inside a pool in order to get the training you needed. Incoming! Sarah shouts on the transmitter. You don't even have time to ask what, as an absurdly fast storm of space debris catches you off guard. It shakes everything around you. You try to hold on tight to the strap that's keeping you safe, but oh no! A piece of debris just hit your helmet shield. Come in, Bob, are you okay? Sarah asks you through the radio. You got a bit shocked by the impact, but everything seems fine. The meteorites are finally gone, so you can focus on your task now. You pull the rope that's connecting the new docking shield closer to your body, but the other part of the rope has nothing on it. Zip. Nada. Oh my, you think to yourself. Come in, Sarah, we have a lost shield. I repeat, we have a lost shield. This is a pretty serious situation, and you are aware of it. Anything that falls into space can go into a collision route with the International Space Station or with other space vehicles. You try to remember your training, but your mind goes blank. This is worse than that one time you broke your girlfriend's favorite ceramic jar. Sarah, the other astronaut who's with you on the ship, is shouting words on the transmitter. Oh no, Bob, Tell me you didn't do this. This is a total catastrophe. I'm coming outside. You spot the shield under the ISS. It's the size of a medium-sized car door, and it's moving quite fast. Here's what can happen in this scenario. The shield could head back down to Earth and break into the atmosphere. It would probably catch fire and disintegrate on the way down, but anyways, it would make NASA and you look pretty bad. The other option is the car door-sized shield gains momentum, and it orbits all the way to hit the ISS, and you for that matter, or some satellite that happens to be in a similar orbit. Here's the thing. If you ever thought that space was an infinite void, you got that part wrong. Since different countries started to build equipment strong enough to travel in space, space has been more crowded than ever. Not with people, but with satellites, asteroids, and space debris. You were surprised when you learned that Earth receives meteorite showers every single day, but they're so small that no one on the surface of the planet notices it. They usually turn to ashes before hitting the ground, but that's not all. What just happened to you on this mission has happened on several other missions before. Astronauts keep losing stuff in outer space. So much so that NASA had to create a division to track down and monitor the orbit of all debris that is just floating carelessly around. You couldn't believe it when someone told you that there are over 23,000 softball-sized pieces of debris roaming around in space, and if we're talking about smaller objects, then that number goes up to 500,000. As you were about to unstrap yourself and dangerously venture through outer space without any protection, you notice Sarah has beat you to it. You can't let her do this alone, so you decide to tag along. FYI, this is against every NASA handbook and training you ever received in your life. But you think, if this works in sci-fi movies, it must work for us. Even though we all know that's very far from the truth. Sarah's close to the debris shield, but her body weight makes her orbit in a completely different direction. Okay, you think to yourself, this is your turn to shine and be a hero. You try moving your arms like you would do underwater, but there's no friction in space. Duh. You can't butterfly swim your way to rescue the rogue equipment. You try to contact Sarah, but she doesn't come in. I guess you're on your own now. For some reason, you start to orbit in a similar route as the floating car door shield. It must be the amount of stuff you've got strapped onto yourself. Or maybe it was the breakfast burrito you had that morning. You feel like you're George Clooney in the movie Gravity. No, better yet, you feel like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yes, you're feeling as strong and powerful as a Jedi right now. You keep your hands stretched before your body, hoping you'll gently collide with the space debris. And 3, 2, 1, and the landing was successful. Just joking, but yes, you managed to dock onto the debris. Hooray. Now what? You think? Guess you needed to have gone through that plan of yours a little bit more, huh? You still have no way of steering the debris. And now, you have no way to contact Mission Control and tell them the object, and yourself, are en route to somewhere. Don't get scared. You didn't come this far to get scared. What's the best thing you can do? First, take a mental picture of the Earth. It never disappoints from up here. Then, you try to play out the possible scenarios that could happen in the situationship you're in. Your normal body weight would not be enough to get you out of Earth's orbit. In the hypothetical scenario in which this did happen, you'd probably be vacuumed into Venus's orbit and spend a quite unpleasant period of your life around immense heat. Even though in Greek mythology, Venus represents love, there is nothing lovely about orbiting close to this planet, and you know this. If you got too close, your spacesuit would never be able to take on the heat. It's only made to sustain temperatures of around 250 degrees Fahrenheit tops, and Venus's atmosphere can heat up to 700 degrees Fahrenheit. But honestly, the worst-case scenario is much simpler than that. Your spacesuit could decide to drown your ears, nose, and mouth in water. Yup, this has happened on spacewalks before yours. You see, in order to keep your spacesuit chill and cool, the suit relies on a gallon's worth of water that makes up for a cooling system. This system, which is supposed to send recycled air into the back of your helmet, does leak sometimes. And since you're stranded in the middle of the big nowhere, you'd have only that nowhere to run. But wait, what's that popping up on the horizon? It's a modular space shuttle. You try shouting, but nobody can hear you outside your helmet. You wave with your hands. But it's coming straight at you. Finally, it took longer than I wished to find you, Sarah said. Apparently, She made it back to the space station just in time to catch you before you went definitely rogue. Guess I'll be losing some astronaut points for this little misadventure, huh? You say. And yes, you definitely will. Houston, we've got good news. A group of select humans is being interviewed to hop on board the first commercial vacation to outer space. The space agency has given you a survey to answer. They want to know what you would pack on this space adventure. Depending on your answers, you just might be one of the chosen ones. Now, how about we take a look at that list together? Pencils. I guess I never would have thought of that, but it makes sense. Legend has it that the US spent millions of dollars trying to design a pen that worked in space. You know, since the lack of gravity is a huge, inescapable factor of life in outer space, pens don't work. The ink won't flow down as it does here on Earth. It turns out that pencils will do the trick. This way you can play word puzzles with the other space tourists, or even make some drawings of your adventure. You'd never forget to pack a toothbrush, of course. According to veteran astronauts, toothbrushes are so simple, yet their technology is enough for space. If you were to squeeze a water bottle inside a spacecraft, the molecules of water would float around in small bubbles. But if you wet your toothbrush, it naturally holds the water in it, keeping it moist to receive your toothpaste. Oh, I was going to say funny socks. Glad that you beat me to it. Here are two things. First, there's not a lot of walking that goes on in space. People don't tend to touch the ground too much up there. And second, space isn't the best place to showcase your fashion style. Yeah! Astronauts tend to use special clothes while they're out there. And it will be no different for you as a space vacationer. So socks will keep your feet warm and fuzzy, but they'll also speak for your fashion interest. Maybe one day you'll wear a smiley face sock, while the other day you'll go for a Grinch-themed one. Of course, socks are pretty helpful on board an aircraft. They'll make you slide through stuff more easily. Next time I go to the convenience store, I'll remember to buy some wet wipes for your space travel. Experienced space travelers do love them. And it wasn't even NASA that invented them, huh? Since water is a no-go inside a spaceship, the best option is wet wipes. Better yet if they're scented. Astronauts even use different kinds of wipes. They buy the disinfecting ones and the ones to use on their bodies. Just make sure you know how to tell the difference between them when you're up there. There's a popular myth that says that NASA invented Velcro. But the truth is, we tend to think that everything that's used in space was invented by NASA for a very intelligent and specific purpose. It wasn't, though. Velcro was invented for mundane reasons back in the 1950s by a Swiss company. They were adopted by space travelers because they work as anti-gravity props. They don't erase gravity, of course. But you can glue Velcros into daily stuff and then hang them on the Velcro attached to the spaceship's walls. It's a very smart system, but best to take your own pair, right? If you're spending a long time in outer space, photographs from back home might come in handy. Choose them well, though. Since the spacecraft isn't all that big, the rest of the people on board will know which pictures you decided to bring along. Best to keep that Harry Styles poster back in your earthly bedroom, right? Just bring real pictures of people that you know and love. Did I hear pizza? A huge part of traveling and exploring new places is being able to taste different flavors of food. In outer space, that's a bit more complicated. But hey, at least you can take some pizza with you. Well, actually, you'd have to have it delivered to you in a cargo ship. This way, ingredients would come fresh and ready to eat. It wouldn't be the first time that people in space tried eating Earthling junk food. Some astronauts have even eaten crepes and hot dogs. Perhaps the best part of this pizza party would be that your food could float. Now, isn't this a super nice way to enjoy some Earth delicacies? As much as I understand your desire to pack a toilet with you on this space trip, that's virtually impossible. I understand you. Some people are attached to the toilets in their homes, and a space toilet is far from the ideal experience. But NASA has been improving their toilet system, and it's the best it's been over the years. So that will have to do. Here's something I would take as well. A laptop. But what good would it do in outer space, you might ask? Apparently, there is internet all over the International Space Station. So even if you're not spending most of your trip docked at the ISS, you could enjoy some Netflix on the days you spend over there. There is internet all over the ISS, apparently. Crazy, huh? And speaking of leisure, I love that you would take a yo-yo. I'm not sure how efficient it would be in space, since there's no gravity to bounce it back and forth, but it would be nice to see how a yo-yo reacts in a gravity-free environment. Oh, I love jigsaw puzzles. This would definitely be on my list as well. Imagine trying to build a jigsaw puzzle that keeps floating in the air. Maybe you'll have to create a system to avoid the separate pieces floating aimlessly through the spacecraft. But imagine once you finish that turtle puzzle, it will look like it's swimming around the craft. You can't pack a window, but they sure are an important part of life in outer space. Let's keep in mind some of the rules of the trip. Each traveler will have the opportunity to do one spacewalk during their time in space. This is already huge. Consider yourself lucky. Some elite astronauts only get to do one spacewalk during their entire career. That is so because spacewalks are risky and require a lot of training. But you'll get your training once you're up there. The thing is, all other days you'll be stuck inside a floating tin can. So windows will come a long way. They'll help to remind you where you are. They'll give you some perspective of space and Earth. Of course, you should take your camera. How else will you be able to register for this once-in-a-lifetime experience? Just make sure it works inside an aircraft or the ISS and you're good to go. Coffee? Don't worry, you don't need to pack your own. Up until recently, astronauts had to rely solely on instantly brewed cups of coffee when they were in space. But you're lucky that coffee experts have already solved this issue. Nowadays, there's the ISS espresso machine. The machine itself is similar in size to an Earthling espresso machine. But to drink it, space travelers have to use a zero-gravity coffee cup together with a straw. If you try drinking it regularly, you wouldn't get hot coffee to hit you directly in your face. Instead, the coffee would be glued to the bottom of your cup. I have to say I really stand this invention. Last, but not least, why not pack your guitar with you? I noticed you were missing a musical instrument. If this was a conventional flight, you might have to pay extra for luggage. But since it's all included, don't be shy and take your guitar. Astronauts such as Chris Hadfield take their musical instruments with them when they're in space. He even became famous for his version of Bowie's Space Oddity, up to the point that Bowie himself told him he lived Chris's version of it. It helps to pass the time, but it's also great for socializing. Can you imagine a pretend bonfire happening in the void of space? I can, and it looks super cool. Well, I think you're set to go. I'll personally call NASA and ask them to pick you as one of the lucky space travelers. See you in outer space, amigo. Buckle up, fellow space enthusiasts, because we're about to uncover the celestial secrets that have been unveiled this year. From giant stars to organic molecules, this year is going great for astronomers. So let's catch up on all the excitement you might have missed in 2023. First of all, we've discovered some real astral monsters. Imagine looking up at the night sky and seeing stars that are not just big, but absolutely enormous. Scientists have been using a special telescope called the James Webb Space Telescope to explore the early days of the universe. And during their adventure, scientists stumbled upon ancient stars that are 10,000 times bigger than our sun. Yes, you heard it right, 10,000 times. These giants of the stellar world were some of the very first stars ever to form in the universe, billions of years ago. Imagine a globular cluster as a massive cosmic crew, where each group consists of a whopping 100,000 to 1 million members. These clusters are like giant family gatherings, with all the stars being born around the same time. But what makes these newly discovered monsters so special? Well, their cores, or their central parts, are way hotter than what we see in stars today. Scientists think that this intense heat might be due to a lot of hydrogen burning at really high temperatures. It's like they're having a galactic barbecue party. Something fascinating happens in these globular clusters. The smaller stars crash into the supermassive ones and gain extra energy, like a power-up. But here's the twist. Most of these clusters are now getting old, and the supermassive stars disappeared a long time ago. We can only see hints of their existence in the clusters we observe today. Scientists study them by just the mysterious traces of their grand presence. The discovery of these monster stars is incredibly important for our understanding of the universe. If scientists can gather more evidence to confirm their existence, it would be a major breakthrough. It would help us learn more about globular clusters and how supermassive stars form in general. But that was only the first fascinating discovery of 2023. Although the next one is kinda sad. You know those beautiful rings that make Saturn look so fancy? Well, guess what? They might disappear in the not-so-distant future, astronomically speaking. NASA's Cassini mission, which explored Saturn from 2004 to 2017, gathered some fascinating data about the rings. During Cassini's grand finale, when it did some cool maneuvers between Saturn, scientists noticed something surprising. The rings were losing a lot of mass every second. Tons of it. That means this magnificent halo will only stick around for a few 100 million more years, at most. That may seem like a long time for humans, but in the grand scheme of the universe, it's just a blink of an eye. The important thing is that we've learned that huge rings like Saturn's don't last forever. They eventually fade away. Oh, well, at least you and I personally won't catch this moment. Scientists have a fun theory about what will happen when Saturn's rings disappear. They think that the other ice and gas giants in our solar system, like Uranus and Jupiter, might have once had massive rings too. But over time, those rings wore down and became more like the thin, wispy bands of asteroids like what Uranus has now. Saturn's rings are mostly made of ice, but they also have a sprinkling of rocky dust. This dust comes from asteroids and teeny tiny meteoroids crashing into the celestial objects and breaking apart. It's like a snowstorm of icy particles and space debris. The research also revealed that Saturn's rings appeared long after the planet itself formed. They were still forming when dinosaurs roamed the Earth. So, in terms of astronomical age, they're actually quite young, only a few 100 million years old. This discovery has got scientists all excited because it means something dramatic happened in Saturn's past to create this stunning icy disk. But this is a mystery waiting to be solved. Scientists want to figure out what exactly caused the rings to form and why they have such a breathtaking structure. Let's hope they'll figure it out. But moving on to something more optimistic, we have another exciting space news. Recently, scientists have been studying one of the most distant galaxies in the universe, and they found something amazing: organic molecules. The galaxy in question has a long name, SPT 041847. It's over 12 billion light-years away from our little blue planet. Can you even imagine that distance? It's the farthest galaxy ever known, where complex organic molecules have been found. That's why looking at this galaxy is like looking at something from when the universe was just a baby. We have no idea what this galaxy looks like now. The light that has reached us is what it looked like when the universe was only 1.5 billion years old. Imagine being able to see things from so far in the past. So what they found is something with a very complicated name: a polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon molecule, or simply PAH molecule. You might be wondering, what in the world is that? Well, guess what? You can actually find these molecules right here on our planet. They can be in things like the smoke from car engines or even forest fires. PAH molecules are made up of chains of carbon atoms. And here's the super cool part: they're considered the basic building blocks for life. Imagine that, life's building blocks. Those tiny carbon chains being discovered in a galaxy that's so far away. That's like finding a needle in a haystack. They also found out that gas floating around in that galaxy is filled with heavy elements. That's a big deal because it suggests that many stars have come and gone there, creating all these amazing elements. This means that this galaxy can be potentially rich in many other elements too. This discovery opens up a world of possibilities and raises so many exciting questions. How did these molecules form in a galaxy so distant? And since we're looking into the past, what could have happened to these organic molecules during this time? Could they have evolved into life? We're only scratching the surface of the incredible things waiting to be uncovered. By the way, if it's so far, how did scientists even manage to discover something like that? Well, they had the instrument called the James Webb Space Telescope. This fancy telescope was recently launched, and has superpowers when it comes to observing the universe. So when the scientists were studying this faraway galaxy, they had a little problem. The light coming from those distant objects was so faint that it was hard to see or detect. But guess what? They had a brilliant idea to solve this. They used something called gravitational lensing, which is like a special power of nature's magnifying glass. Imagine two galaxies lining up perfectly, just like in a photo shoot. The light from the faraway galaxy, the background one, travels towards us. But on its journey, it passes through the foreground galaxy, which is like a giant space lens. And guess what? The foreground galaxy's gravity bends the light, just like a magnifying glass, making it bigger and brighter. It's like having a cosmic zoom lens for our telescopes. This bending of light creates a super cool shape called an Einstein ring. It's like a halo, or a ring of light surrounding the foreground galaxy, basically a nature's way of showing off its magical powers. With gravitational lensing and these beautiful Einstein rings, scientists can see distant objects more clearly and learn amazing things about the universe. And thanks to all that, they managed to uncover the hidden chemical interactions from the early galaxies. Isn't that incredible? The scientists are beyond excited about this discovery. They never expected to find such complex organic molecules in a galaxy that's incredibly distant. Who knows? Maybe this is just the beginning of a thrilling cosmic journey. So, keep your eyes on the stars, fellow space explorers. The universe is full of surprises, and who knows what other mind-blowing discoveries await us out there. Let's hope we'll learn even more in the future.
You get the last instructions from the team and get into your spaceship. It's the first spacecraft made on Earth that can move at a speed close to the speed of light. Your task is to visit the most unusual and terrifying places in space and send scientists detailed information about them. And so, your journey begins. Your spacecraft is accelerating, and you dash past the moon. In the distance, you see a small reddish planet. It's Mars. And look at that spectacular giant surrounded by a set of rings. That's Saturn. You wish you could have more time to explore this gas giant, but you have to hurry. You pass by beautiful stars. Some of them are luminous, others have a reddish hue, and some seem to be dimming. That's Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky on Earth. It's about 8.6 light-years away from us, but you're traveling fast, and soon you see Polaris, aka the North Star, which is way further, 431 light-years away. Sometimes you manage to spot tiny dots circling these stars. Those are planets. And then, suddenly, you see nothing. At first, you're horrified. Something has gone wrong, and you've accidentally entered a black hole? Has your equipment malfunctioned? Because it seems that at a distance of 700 million light-years away from Earth, there's a hole. A blank void with no galaxies, stars, planets, or asteroids. You can't see anything. The void is a roughly spherical region of about 330 million light-years across. Our home Milky Way galaxy could fit in there billions of times over. And then it dawns on you. What you're looking at is the mysterious Boötes void. It lies about 700 million light-years away from Earth in the constellation of Boötes, the herdsman driving the plow around the North Pole. At first, this void was called the Great Nothing, but later it was given its current name. Now we know that galaxies look like a giant web. Most of them are parts of long structures called filaments. Those wind through the cosmos, and when they meet, they form regions with a high concentration of galaxies. These regions are what we know as galaxy clusters, but between these clusters and threads, there are ginormous empty voids that hardly contain any galaxies. Such voids actually make up almost 80% of the observable universe, and most of them are huge, from 30 to 300 million light-years wide. The Boötes void is one of the most massive ones. It's even earned the title of supervoid. Astronomers think it might be the result of a few smaller voids merging together. But what could have caused such giant empty areas to appear in the first place? The reason might lie in the origin of the universe. In its early days, all the matter in the universe was packed together quite tightly. Astronomers even think it was something like a uniform soup. But pretty soon, random quantum fluctuations started distributing this matter. Some areas became denser. As a result, their gravitational pull became stronger, and they began stealing matter from less dense regions. This made such areas even denser, and they kept attracting more and more matter. At the same time, smaller clumps of matter started drifting further away from the center, forming galaxies. After staring at nothingness for some time, you decide to explore other space objects and start the engine of your spacecraft again. There's one kind of space formation you've been looking forward to seeing: nebulas. Those are gigantic clouds of gas and dust. With time, gravity starts to pull these clumps of dust and gas together. They grow larger and larger, and their gravity gets more powerful. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? One day, this mass becomes so big that it collapses under its own gravity and forms new stars. So, you decide to visit some of the most beautiful nebulas out there. And you start with the Butterfly Nebula. This butterfly's wingspan is more than 3 light years. And the structure inside the nebula is one of the most complicated ever observed. The central star, a white dwarf, is heated to an incredible 450,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It means it was formed from a gargantuan star, likely more than 5 times the size of our Sun. The white dwarf is surrounded by a thick disk of dust and gas at the equator. That's what probably makes the whole structure look like an hourglass or a butterfly. The next place you decide to visit is the Eskimo Nebula, 5,000 light-years away from Earth in the constellation of Gemini. It was discovered more than 200 years ago and got its name for a reason. Its double shell formation looks like a person's face hidden in a padded hood of a winter jacket. But in reality, this parka is a disk of material with a ring of comet-shaped objects. And the tails of these objects stream away from the star at the center of the Eskimo Nebula. The bizarre orange streaks in the outer part of the cloud stretch light-years away in all directions. As for the Eskimo's face, even though it resembles a ball of twine, in reality, it's a bubble of material blown into space by the wind of high-speed material produced by the central star. Your next destination is the Ring Nebula. At first sight, it's a giant cloud of dust and gas surrounding an old, almost extinguished star, which does look like a ring. But astronomers say the nebula isn't a bagel, it's a jelly-filled donut. The deep space colorful object more than 2,000 light-years away from Earth is actually a ring that wraps around a blue, ball-shaped structure. Each end of the structure sticks out of the ring's opposite sides. Now you can head to a place called the Pillars of Creation. You find it more than 7,000 light-years away from Earth in the Eagle Nebula. That's a young cluster of stars just 5.5 million years old, space babies. Once, the Hubble Space Telescope managed to take an image of several dark silhouettes near the nebula's center. And now you can see them with your own eyes. Those are the so-called Pillars of Creation, an active star-forming region. And since you've already visited a star-forming region, why don't you drop by a living fossil galaxy? For example, DG-SAT-1. It's as big as the Milky Way, but it's nearly invisible because its stars are spread out incredibly thinly. But what makes the galaxy so unique is that it's sitting all alone, unlike other galaxies of this kind, which are usually found in clusters. It can mean that DG-SAT-1 was formed in a different era, probably a mere 1 billion years after the Big Bang. If it's true, the galaxy is a real living fossil. The next stop on your space sightseeing tour is the Black Widow Pulsar. Just like its spider namesake, this rotating neutron star is munching on its partner, a lightweight brown dwarf star. The more material the pulsar consumes, the more slowly it spins. The energy the neutron star is losing in the process causes the companion star to dwindle. Oh, look at this! That's a stellar nursery in the constellation of Centaurus. But even though this place might be called nursery, it's anything but peaceful or safe. This region, made up of hydrogen and newborn stars, is located in a nebula in the constellation of Centaurus, around 6,500 light-years away from Earth. The intense energy these baby stars emit makes hydrogen clouds glow ominous red. This energy is so powerful that it's eating away dark clouds of dust, and they're disappearing like lumps of butter on a hot frying pan. You're continuing your journey when you see something absolutely amazing, a cloud of water floating in space. To be more precise, it's a cloud of water vapor surrounding a supermassive black hole 12 billion light-years away from Earth. The cloud contains 140 trillion times the entire volume of water on our planet. Astronomers believe this water cloud appeared just 1.6 billion years later than the universe itself.
We often see humans living on other planets like Mars. Colonizing our solar system and beyond has long been a dream of humankind. The idea of humans going to space dates back to at least 1610. A German astronomer named Johannes Kepler wrote to an Italian astronomer named Galileo. Kepler said that we could create ships to travel in space, and even create maps of the stars. People got more excited about space during the famous space race. NASA was created in the 50s. They did many cool things, like sending space stations, Mars rovers, and exploring other planets. All this made space travel seem more real. Today, we've developed to the point where we finally discuss the possibility of space tourism. We're already sending regular people into space. Only very rich people, of course. But many believe that, in just a few decades, space tourism will become normal. We'll be able to fly to Earth's orbit and back, as if on some kind of tour. Spaceships will replace airplanes, and it will only take 2 hours to get from Australia to England. And finally, we'll begin to travel to other planets in our solar system. Some scientists even believe we'll have colonies on the Moon or Mars by the 2060s. In the future, we could colonize not only Mars, but some of the moons, like our own, Ceres, Titan, and others. But the thing is, why do we even want to live on other planets? Surprising question, huh? Sure, the answer might seem obvious at first glance. Humans want to learn about space and other planets. This curiosity is what led us to other big discoveries like going to the Antarctic and the Moon. Next, safety, of course. Humans have a moral duty to ensure our survival. Colonizing space could protect us from disasters that might wipe out life on Earth. Plus, by settling space, we improve our chances of survival and fulfill a moral obligation to do so. Besides, with Earth's overpopulation, colonizing other planets could relieve the strain on our home planet. Another thing is, colonizing a planet means living there and using its resources. And let me tell you, there are lots of resources in space. Our solar system alone has things to use for fuel, like Titan. Space colonization could bring us clean energy, access to new materials, new technologies, and so on. The more we colonize space and learn about it, the more we could benefit humanity. More technology, more exploration, more innovation, and so on. History also says explorers are way less likely to get into fights. Expanding and exploring, scientists claim, keeps us busy with cool discoveries, growth, and research. The more we explore, the less we're stuck with our earthly problems. But on the other hand, not everyone is interested in going to space. And maybe colonizing space isn't as good an idea as it seems. First of all, is it even possible? Some people say that living in space is just too far-fetched. You might have heard about terraforming. Terraforming basically means changing and improving the planet however we want, as if we were in some character maker in a video game. Sounds great, in theory. In reality, terraforming Mars, for example, could take hundreds of years and cost millions of dollars, according to experts. Colonizing our moon could cost an unimaginable $104 billion. It's 7 times NASA's yearly budget. And that's not even counting the earthly costs. But the biggest, most important question is it really that cool to live in space, though? Space isn't your cozy home at all. Most celestial bodies are radiation hotspots, all because of the solar winds. Imagine a wind so fierce that it can strip planets of their very atmospheres. Our sun is a real danger to each planet in the system. Yes, including our own Earth. Stars are crazy powerful. They shoot out charged particles all the time. These particles can zoom around at incredible speeds, going up to 5 million miles per hour. These gusts of particles can leave an entire planet all barren. Poof. No more life-sustaining air. The water on the planet would evaporate, then freeze. The temperature would plummet to very chilling. And even daytime skies would be as black as night. Lucky for us, Earth has an amazing shield called a magnetosphere. It protects us from these space winds. But scientists are studying these winds to help us find other friendly planets out there. By checking out stars' properties, gravity, and magnetic fields, we can see if their planets can truly host life. And it's very hard to find a planet that isn't showered by radiation all the time. It has to have a very thick atmosphere, like on Earth, to prevent this from happening. Unfortunately, we haven't discovered any planets like this so far, which is why living in space would mean dealing with crazy health problems. Temperatures and radiation are just the beginning. What about muscle loss, troubles with vision, and many other things? Humans are way too vulnerable for that. Robots are more suited for space exploration due to its hostile conditions. Let's take Mars, for example. The red planet is freezing and very uninviting. In fact, the Earth could face almost anything, even mega problems, and still be better than Mars. Mars is a desert with barely any water, very far from the idea of a dream home. Let's imagine that the Earth's air get polluted. Mars still wouldn't be better. The air there is super thin and 96% carbon dioxide. Earth's air is a cakewalk compared to that. Or even if a huge asteroid crashes into Earth, we're still better off here than on other planets. It might even be a pretty big asteroid, like the one that wiped off the dinosaurs. This event was absolutely catastrophic, plunging the Earth into utter chaos. It created a massive crater called the Chicxulub crater. The impact led to massive fires, tsunamis, and a lot of dust and debris flying into the sky. The dust and debris blocked out the sun for a long time. Can you imagine what happens when there's no sunlight at all for a while? Everything got really cold and dark. This darkness and coldness affected plants and animals. Without sunlight, plants couldn't make food through photosynthesis, and that meant many animals lost their source of food. And these were only short-term consequences. Of course, many species became extinct because of that, but even with all that, 25% of species managed to survive somehow. If this same asteroid had hit Mars, the outcome would have been much worse. Mars doesn't have enough things like water and air to support life like Earth does, so the consequences would be way harsher. Actually, the Earth survived not 1, but 5 mass extinctions. And life still managed to thrive on our planet, even after all that. As you can see, it's almost impossible to make the Earth completely inhabitable. Our planet will always be the most habitable place compared to anywhere else in our solar system, unless we do something extremely insane. Which is why we need to protect it. Here we come to the famous "the Earth's in trouble" argument. If something bad happens to our planet, why not focus on fixing it instead of flying away? Critics argue that if we can't take care of Earth, we shouldn't spread our problems to other planets or moons. Are we really capable of responsibly colonizing other worlds if we can't even manage our own? Plus, there's still so much to explore even on our own planet. Humans haven't even lived in Antarctica or under Earth's oceans yet. Are we sure we're ready for worlds that are even more extreme than that? So, even if Earth gets into trouble, we shouldn't just ditch it. We have to work together and create safe zones. It would be a big challenge, sure, but it's still way more doable and cheaper than building space colonies. Of course, the idea of humans living in space and traveling to other planets is very exciting, but we should never forget our sweet home, and we should remember that life isn't science fiction. We should use our technology rationally and focus on making the Earth safer and better. And what do you think about it?
Traveling to space costs a fortune, but there's a way to make it affordable. You step into an elevator, push the button, and voila! You're flying to the stars, all thanks to nanotubes. But then something hits the elevator on the way. You're stuck inside, and now you're doomed to float in space forever. Now, if you want to travel in space, get ready to shell out around $55 million. But in the near future, you'll probably be able to travel to space with just the push of a button without breaking the bank, because space elevators might come into play. While the idea of galactic lifts seems like something out of a sci-fi movie, it is a real possibility that could revolutionize space travel. With an estimated cost of $8 billion, space elevators could be a one-time investment that would last us forever. NASA alone spends around $2.7 million on rocket fuel per minute. To launch a rocket, they need to pay up to $178 million. These costs could be significantly reduced with the use of elevators. Most super tall buildings on Earth have a massive foundation to help with their balance and weight. As you look up, they get thinner and thinner. Even the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa, is massive at the bottom and narrow at the top. If we wanted to construct something like a gigantic lift, we would need an enormous amount of concrete to build a foundation for it, which goes against the point of saving some cash. Now, get a string, tie a ball at the end of it, and start spinning it. The string in your hand will stay in one place, and the ball will revolve around your hand. This is called centrifugal force, and the elevator will work in the same way. The ball will be the base in space, and the rope will hang toward Earth. The station from where we would enter the elevator would be in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and the line would extend from there. For this to be possible, the line must be perfectly synchronized with Earth's rotation. Otherwise, it would simply break or wrap around the Earth like a scarf. Also, the orbit the line would be following should be a perfect circle, because the line wouldn't be able to get shorter or extend. A bunch of research has been done using algebra to find the ideal solution. Wait a second, there's a use for algebra? Never mind. Meanwhile, I won't bore you with the math. We'll go straight to the point where the precise distance from the station in the Atlantic to the one in space must be 22,236 miles above the Earth, where the geosynchronous orbit starts. There, the four outward forces are much stronger than the downward force. That's why the station would stay in one place. When you construct a house or a building, you start from the bottom going up. But to create this engineering wonder, we would need to do everything in reverse and start at the top. The main problem here would be the weight. If the line was too heavy, it would disrupt the orbit, and the conveyor dumbwaiter host would not work. So, we need to balance the station in space to ensure it worked flawlessly. Steel is one of the most robust materials on Earth. The cable in every lift is made from steel. But when you need a 22,236-mile-long cable, things can get tricky. Steel is hard to break, but it's cumbersome, and when you have to use a lot of it, problems start to arise. We use heavy steel a lot in construction, but we have lighter materials that might put less stress on the station and eliminate this problem. Also, the line would have to be tapered because, at the endpoint, there would be close to zero stress. But it would still have to be thicker than really needed due to a bunch of safety factors. At the start, the rope would be around 0.5 inches. After using some complicated math, we can figure out the thickness at the end, which is a number so long I am unable to pronounce it. But believe me, it's a big one. So, steel is off the list. Another candidate is Kevlar, which is 5 times stronger than steel. And if we added such materials as carbon and titanium into the mix, the strength would increase tenfold. The line would have a diameter of around 262 to 557 feet. This is drastically smaller than the diameter of the steel cable could be. The bad news is that doing this is too pricey. So, if we don't find the ideal medium to build a cable, the idea of the space elevator will just be a massive waste of time. If only we had some magically light material with a power of 60 gigapascals, which would have a taper ratio of 1.6. Oh wait, we actually do have this unique material. It's called carbon nanotube. It has a strength of 130 gigapascals, which is much more than we need. Nanotubes are made out of carbon and are 100,000 times thinner than a human hair. This material is solid and has good conductive power, which is possible thanks to its unique atomic structure. We use this product in many things, from batteries to optics, and it can be modified entirely and adapted for more uses. Bradley Edwards is the guy responsible for this crazy idea. NASA was looking for new innovations, and they said, "Don't do anything too crazy and start building a space hoist." I guess Bradley took this as a challenge and started working on the elevator. Edwards wrote a paper about a galactic conveyor. When he published it, he expected many people to find flaws in his work, but surprisingly, nobody did. His work was spot on. He came up with the idea of strapping a nanotube line to a rocket and launching it into space. The other end of the rope would fall onto Earth, and robots would use this rope to climb up and make it longer, so we could start building an elevator space station. After this, the elevator could start transporting everything, from solar panels to tourists. In the future, space tourism could be totally possible. Who knows? We might even go on vacations in space. Hey, looking for some atmosphere for your getaway? Well, don't come here. We don't have any. Oops. Probably not a good advertising slogan, huh? Meanwhile, a couple of years ago, we could only create microscopic carbon nanotubes. But as time went on, much more research was done to make them bigger. Now they reach up to a few inches. In 20 years, they could be miles long. Carbon costs $28 per ounce. If we do the math, we would see that we would need around $1 billion to build a lift. Yeah, it sounds expensive, but it's a long-term solution to space travel, and it can actually save us a lot of money in the long run. Now, everything looks perfect on paper, but NASA's main reason why they chose not to go along with this project is that right now there are probably more than 128 million objects floating in orbit, and they might pose a real threat to the elevator. The lift could be made to withstand a few hits now and then, but getting hammered non-stop is not part of the plan. Still, Bradley argues that tons of monitoring devices track space debris. Thus, the elevator could avoid them all. Now, if something hit the elevator or the line somehow broke, the consequences would not be too bad. If there were no passengers on board, of course. If the line got cut, the elevator would simply float away into space, posing no threat to people on Earth. In Japan, engineers are trying to build a space elevator. The lift could be used for space mining, too. We could easily cover the cost of the entire elevator by collecting asteroids, because some of them are made of expensive metals. We could mine them and quickly bring them back to Earth.
In 2008, NASA had an intriguing question. How do spiders construct their webs in zero gravity? Therefore, they sent 2 spiders to the International Space Station. The first spider was the main participant, while the second served as a backup in case the first one didn't survive. However, things didn't go according to plan. The backup spider managed to escape from its chamber and visited its companion, resulting in a bit of a mess. They built tangled webs that interfered with each other. As if that wasn't enough, the flies that were supposed to be food for the spiders started reproducing faster than anticipated. Their larvae escaped from their container and covered the front window of the chamber. Over time, the spiders were completely hidden behind the larvae. Although this initial experiment didn't go well, one of the researchers involved in planning the spider experiment was still curious. In 2011, she got another opportunity to repeat the same experiment. This time, she sought assistance from other researchers. They decided to send a different species of spider into space and prepared 4 spiders, 2 for the ISS and 2 for Earth, allowing for result comparison. The goal was to expose the spiders to varying gravity conditions and observe their behavior. However, another twist appeared in the story. Initially, they believed they had 4 female spiders, but it turned out that 2 of them were actually males. Determining the sex of young spiders can be tricky, but fortunately, one male had already been sent to space, while the other remained on Earth, enabling valuable data collection. The second experiment proved successful. The spiders were active. They built and dismantled webs, and even without the assistance of gravity, they spun new ones. 3 cameras captured thousands of pictures, showcasing their hard work on the webs. Interestingly, it seemed that spiders created significantly more symmetrical webs in space than on Earth. The center of the webs was closer to the middle, and surprisingly, the spiders didn't always position their heads downward as they typically do on Earth. However, one significant factor made all the difference: light. When the spiders on the ISS had a source of light, they weaved asymmetrical webs, similar to those found on our home planet. Light played a crucial role in orienting the spiders in space. The chamber's lamps were attached at the top. If the lights had been positioned differently, for example on the side, it would have been challenging to observe the effect of light on the symmetry of webs in zero gravity. When the lights were turned off, the spiders rested in random orientations within their webs. Yet with the lights on, they would orient themselves away from the light source, which meant downward. Hence, in the absence of gravity, light assisted them in orientation. This discovery was unexpected, because spiders can typically build their webs in the dark and capture prey effectively, even without light. Spider's web itself is such a cool thing wherever they are. It's like these creatures have small silk production factories inside them. Within their body, a thread is stored in the form of a highly concentrated liquid. And a regular garden spider can produce up to 7 different types of silk, each having a unique combination of proteins. Each type of silk has a different purpose. For example, one type of thread makes the web elastic, which means the web absorbs the impact when insects collide with it. Another type of silk makes the thread flexible and strong, so it's more difficult to break. Some proteins found in the silk protect it from harmful bacteria and fungi, allowing the web to last longer. They also keep the silk moist so it doesn't dry out. Wow. Imagine having a home where you don't have to buy anything extra to maintain it. Spider silk is lighter than cotton and incredibly thin, up to 1,000 times thinner than human hair. But it's also insanely strong. I mean, it must be, since that's what they rely on while living their everyday life. Whether they're preying on some wandering insect or trying to resist heavy rain and wind. But you wouldn't expect it to be stronger than steel, right? Of course, in reality, you don't come across steel that thin. But if you could find a piece with the same weight as spider silk, you'd see that it has similar strength when pulled or stretched. In fact, spider silk is 5 times stronger than steel of the same thickness. Spider silk is also super stretchy, able to stretch up to 4 times its original length without breaking. Plus, it remains strong even in freezing temperatures below -40 degrees F. The most common type of spider is the orb weaver. They're masters at building those webs you keep seeing in open areas. That's where they have a better chance to catch a tasty lunch. But since they choose such spots, their webs are more prone to damage. That's why these spiders have a fascinating habit. They often rebuild their entire webs every day, even if the current web seems perfectly fine. I wish I was this dedicated to maintaining my bedroom. These spiders actually do this because they want to be prepared for the evening when they patiently wait for their potential prey to get caught in their carefully set trap. At first, this might seem like a waste of time. After all, they need to invest a significant amount of protein to produce the silk that forms their webs. But even if an orb weaver spider doesn't catch its meal overnight, it usually has enough silk proteins to dismantle its old web and build a new one for the following night. As the spider removes the old web, it consumes the silk at the same time, and by doing that, recycles the proteins it contains. If you've ever observed a spider on its web, You must have noticed how attentively it responds to even the slightest vibrations. It turns out that spider silk can be finely adjusted to different sound frequencies, unlike any other material. When a spider builds its web, it doesn't just spin the silk and leave it as it is. The spider actually makes adjustments to the silk by changing how tight or loose it is, and how different threads are connected. This way, it creates a web that can vibrate or make different kinds of sounds. The spider is like a musician tuning their guitar. This feather-legged lace weaver is called the garden center spider because it mostly enjoys humid greenhouse conditions. And it has a really cool way of catching insects. Instead of spinning sticky webs like other spiders, it uses electricity. It produces incredibly thin silk, almost at the nanoscale. And on its hind legs, this spider has special hairs that act like tiny combs. As the silk emerges from its body, the spider uses these hairs to comb and manipulate the silk. And here's where the magic happens. This process generates an electric charge. The threads of the silk are now crackling with electricity, so they come together to form little poofs that resemble fluffy balls of wool. These electrically charged poofs are a great way to trap innocent insects wandering around. When unsuspecting prey comes into contact with them, the electric charge causes the threads to cling to their bodies, making it almost impossible to get away. Female Darwin's bark spiders make gigantic webs that can stretch over rivers and lakes, which means they can reach over 80 feet across. It turns out such enormous webs are just a part of their genius plan to catch their prey. A super strong web that goes across the water like a bridge can capture large insects that gracefully fly above the water's surface, like dragonflies, and it's an impressive project that takes days to construct. These special lines go across the river and anchor the web firmly to each bank. There's no easy way out of this.
So, what comes to your mind when you hear the words green monster? The Hulk? Shrek? Probably. But definitely not a young supernova in the Milky Way galaxy. Oh, and if you have forgotten what our home galaxy looks like, here, have a look. So anyway, is that supernova indeed green and, scary? Not really. But let's start from the very beginning. Cassiopeia A, aka Cass A, is the remnants of a stellar explosion astronomers spotted in the sky 340 years ago. This supernova is 11,000 light-years away from us in the constellation Cassiopeia, and its remains span about 10 light-years. Recently, scientists have managed to capture the sharpest image of these leftovers yet, all thanks to the James Webb Space Telescope, the largest optical telescope in space. The image is full of bright colors, brilliant green, orange, and pink. Maybe if you printed it out, it would make a great painting for your living room. Just like this canvas. Each hue represents a different wavelength of infrared light, which is normally invisible to the human eye. The image can help astronomers figure out what happened to the poor star before its demise. Cass A is the youngest known remnant of a massive star that once exploded in our galaxy. On its exterior, at the top and left, you can see curtains of material that seem red and orange because of the emission of warm dust. That's where the ejected material from the exploded star collides with the surrounding gas and dust. Inside this outer shell, there are chunks of bright pink bubble-shaped material that form clumps and knots. It comes from the star itself. This material is shining because of the mix of heavy elements like neon, argon, and oxygen. Astronomers have spotted some dust emissions in that region too, but they haven't located the sources of these emissions yet. There's also a prominent green loop extending across the right side of the supernova's central cavity. And if you look closely, you'll notice that a big region of Cass A is pockmarked with something that looks like small bubbles, which makes the thing even more complex and hard to understand. The first X-rays from Cass A appeared in the 60s, but light from the supernova probably reached Earth in the 1600s. Unfortunately, there are no confirmed written observations of the supernova from those times. It must have looked like an extremely bright star, and historians still doubt whether any observers noticed it. Oh, and I bet you've been wondering about the nickname, right? This space phenomenon was called the Green Monster in honor of Fenway Park in Boston. Its large green left field wall has the same name. One of the main questions Cass A might help us answer is, where does all that cosmic dust come from? Astronomers have discovered that even very young galaxies at the early stages of their lives are filled with massive amounts of dust. So, does the universe need vacuum cleaning, or is the problem more complicated? One of the crucial components in the appearance of this dust seems to be supernova. They spew truly terrifying amounts of heavy elements, which are basically building blocks of dust across the cosmos. So let's try to figure out what these supernovae are and how they occur. Good old stars keep their spherical shape because their gigantic mass creates a powerful gravitational field that pulls gas toward the center, and at the same time, their cores produce enough energy to prevent gas from gathering too close to the center. All this creates a nice balance and a beautiful ball-like shape. But once a star becomes too old and massive, about 4 to 8 times as big as our Sun, it doesn't have any more fuel left. That's why all the reactions in its core stop. The star's outer layers instantly try to collapse inward, but they bounce off the core, which remains incredibly dense. That's when everything but the star's core blasts out all over the universe in a bright supernova explosion. Now, as you may know, our solar system itself can be a pretty scorching place. For example, the temperature of Earth's core almost reaches a whopping 10,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about as hot as the temperature on the surface of the Sun. As for the Sun's superhot center, it's heated up to 27 million degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, that's hot. But if we talk about the universe, such temperatures are nowhere near hot in comparison with a supernova. As you now know, it's the very last stage of a star's life, which ends in a gigantic explosion. This explosion is one of the largest in space, and it unleashes enormous amounts of energy. Therefore, the temperature at the core of a supernova is an incredible 6,000 times higher than that of the Sun's core. And it means it can reach several billion degrees Fahrenheit within microseconds, which is almost impossible to imagine. After that, atoms get crammed together so infinitely closely that the squeezed core recoils and a star explodes, creating a superheated shockwave. Anyway, let's get back to our Cass A. By studying it with the help of the James Webb Telescope, astronomers hope to get a better understanding of its dust content. This, in turn, will help them figure out where the building blocks of stars, planets, satellites, and us humans come from. Experts can locate regions with different gas composition and look at the types of dust that form there. Oh, by the way, if you're interested in space too, but don't have your access to the James Webb Telescope, you can get yourself a telescope of your own and enjoy amazing views. Supernovae, as the one which created Cass A, are very important for life as we know it. They spread such elements as, for example, calcium that we have in our bones, or iron our blood contains, literally seeding new stars and planets. You, my friend, are made from star stuff. Supernovae don't always mean the end of stars. Even though a star loses its outer layer, it might still survive the explosion. Then it either becomes a black hole or a new kind of star. See for yourself. Even without the outer layers, a star's core keeps collapsing. At one moment, the pressure inside becomes so high that electrons and protons virtually melt into each other and form neutrons. The result of this crazy fusion is a neutron star, whose mass consists of 90% of neutrons. It means that the thing just can't get squashed any tighter. Then, energy starts to leave the fading star, transforming it into a neutron star. And the amount of this energy is so great that it can be compared with the combined light emitted by all the stars in the observable universe. Energy is leaving the star in the form of neutrinos, subatomic particles that are similar to electrons but with no electric charge and a very small mass. And during a supernova explosion, the star emits almost 10 times more neutrinos than the number of protons, electrons, and neutrons in the Sun. No wonder that in such conditions, something truly scary gets born. A neutron star, which is basically a monster nucleus, the central part of an atom, is relatively small. Even though scientists don't know for sure how big neutron stars are, they suppose that these space bodies shouldn't be bigger than 12 miles across. For comparison, our Sun is almost 865,000 miles across, which is 109 Earths put side to side. But even with such a modest size, any neutron star will be at least 1.5 times heavier than the Sun. Think about this. If you scoop just a teaspoon of neutron star insides, this stuff would weigh no less than 1 billion tons. That's very dense. So dense that the next stop is the black hole itself. Well, what can I say? Space is an endless source of mystery and inspiration for me. I'm even considering adding some Space Vibes to my home, and I know just the thing to do it. Hey, don't thank me.